My father laughed at my wedding and said, "After all these years, you're still just a gardener." A few people around him smiled because they thought he was teasing me. My mother lifted her champagne glass and added, "At least your husband has a real career." I was still deciding whether answering them was worth wasting another minute of my wedding when a man stepped into our little circle. My father's smile changed instantly. Henry Blackwell looked straight at me and said, "There you are. Caroline still talks about the estate you designed for us." My father stared at me. "You work for him?" Henry laughed. "Work for me? I waited 8 months for her." Before I tell you what happened next, I hope you're having a good day, wherever you're listening from, because what I thought was one humiliating family moment turned out to be the first crack in something much bigger. Stay with me, because my father's face changed for a reason I didn't understand yet. And if you enjoy stories about families discovering too late that the person they underestimated was paying attention, please subscribe to the channel and join us for the rest of the story. My name is Morgan Carter, and I was 38 years old when Ryan and I got married that October. By then, I had spent enough years around my parents to recognize the difference between my father being embarrassed and my father being afraid. Embarrassment made Robert Carter louder. He joked harder, talked faster, slapped shoulders, and acted as if whatever had just happened had been part of his plan all along. Fear did something different. It emptied his face. That was what I saw after Henry Blackwell laughed. For half a second, Dad looked as if somebody had handed him a bill he knew he couldn't pay. Then the expression disappeared. "Henry," he said, recovering quickly, "I didn't realize you two knew each other." That was true, at least from his perspective. Dad knew I owned a design firm. He knew I worked on expensive houses. He had seen articles about me because my mother occasionally forwarded them to relatives with captions that somehow managed to sound proud and dismissive at the same time. What neither of them knew was that Henry and Caroline Blackwell had been clients of mine 3 years earlier. There was nothing mysterious about that. My firm worked on private residential projects, and privacy mattered to many of our clients. I didn't hand my parents a customer list any more than Ryan handed them the medical records of his patients. Henry's estate had appeared in our portfolio under the name of the property, not the names of the people who owned it. My father had simply never asked enough about my work to connect the dots. Henry smiled. Morgan designed the landscape at our place in Bedford. Caroline found her through our architect. Dad glanced at me as though I had intentionally hidden a winning lottery ticket from him. I held his gaze. He had just called me a gardener in front of his own business guests. I wasn't going to apologize, because one of those guests happened to know what I actually did. My mother recovered faster than he did. "Well," Diane said brightly, "Morgan was always creative." Creative. That was Mom's favorite word for me. It sounded generous until you understood how she used it. Ashley, my younger sister, was practical. Dad was entrepreneurial. Ryan was accomplished. I was creative. Creative was what you called a child who made beautiful things before asking the adults with real jobs to pay the mortgage. I might have let the conversation end there. It was my wedding. Ryan was standing beside me, looking calm but watching me closely enough that I knew he had heard every word. There were friends I actually wanted to talk to, music I had spent weeks choosing, and a husband I had no intention of abandoning in the middle of our reception because my parents had behaved exactly like themselves. Then Henry said something that changed the entire night. "Actually, Robert, that reminds me. Caroline had a question about the design team in your proposal." My father's fingers tightened around his glass. It was tiny. Most people would never have noticed. I did. Dad interrupted before Henry could continue. "Absolutely. We'll go through all of that next week. Tonight is about Morgan and Ryan." I looked at him. 10 seconds earlier, he had been making my career the punchline of the evening. Suddenly, he was fiercely protective of my wedding. Henry didn't seem to notice anything strange. "Of course. Caroline just wanted me to make sure I asked." "Monday," Dad said. "Call me Monday." Henry nodded, then turned back to me. "Seriously, Morgan, Caroline still talks about that lower terrace. She says it's the first time anyone ever designed a garden that actually made her use the garden. That was the goal, I said. He laughed again. Worth the wait. We exchanged a few more polite words before he moved away to find Caroline. I watched him go. Then I looked at my father. What proposal? Dad took a drink. Not tonight. You brought it up tonight. Henry brought it up, and apparently my firm is involved somehow. Mom stepped between us, with the practiced smile she used when she wanted a disagreement to disappear before anyone else noticed it. Morgan, sweetheart, please. You're getting married. Can we not turn everything into business? I almost laughed. Dad had spent half the reception circulating among people he wanted to impress. Henry and Caroline were there because my parents had been allowed to invite one table of their own friends and business contacts. Ryan and I had paid for the wedding ourselves, apart from the extra costs attached to that table, which Dad and Mom had covered, because it mattered more to them than it did to us. I had agreed because there was room. At the time, it had seemed like one of those compromises that cost me almost nothing. That night, I began learning how expensive apparently small permissions could become. I asked one question, I said, and your father said he'll explain later. No, he said not tonight. Mom's smile tightened. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Making your father feel foolish. I stared at her. Behind us, the band had shifted into another song. Someone laughed near the bar. Waiters moved through the room carrying trays of champagne. My wedding continued around us as if this conversation deserved no more importance than a broken glass. Dad called me a gardener in front of his client, I said. Then his client corrected him. I didn't make Dad look foolish. Mom lowered her voice. It was a joke. It stopped being funny years ago. Her eyes flicked toward Dad. That was another old family habit. Whenever I drew a boundary, Mom treated the boundary as an attack, and my father's reaction as the emergency. I had participated in that system for longer than I liked admitting. Not by surrendering my money or career. I had never done that. But I had learned to conserve energy. Dad called my work landscaping. I stopped correcting him. Mom referred to my firm as my little studio. I let it pass. Ashley once joked that I spent my days picking hydrangeas for rich women, and I asked her whether selling Dad's reputation was exhausting. That one had not improved sisterly relations. I wasn't endlessly patient. I wasn't the daughter who quietly paid everyone's debts and waited 20 years to discover self-respect. My problem was different. I had convinced myself that because I no longer needed their approval, their opinions no longer mattered. That turned out to be only half true. Listen to me, I told Mum. I am not having this conversation again tonight. No more jokes about my work. No more comments about Ryan having a real career. If you can manage that, enjoy the reception. Her mouth opened. I turned away before she could answer. That was my boundary then. Clean. Fast. No speech. Ryan caught up with me near the dance floor. You okay? I'm married to you, the food is good, and nobody has set anything on fire. Overall, excellent evening. His mouth twitched. You want me to ask what happened? You were standing 6 feet away. I meant what happened with Blackwell. That's what I'd like to know. Ryan glanced toward my father. Your dad looked strange when Henry mentioned the proposal, so you saw it too. He looked like somebody had unplugged him. That made me laugh despite myself. Ryan touched the back of my hand. Do you want to deal with it now? No. You sure? Very. I meant it. Whatever Dad had done, there was almost nothing I could learn from confronting him in a ballroom while everyone involved had champagne in their hands. He would minimize. Mom would reinterpret. Ashley, if she got pulled into it, would explain that I was misunderstanding how business worked. I had spent enough time in meetings to know that when something felt wrong, you gathered the documents before you gathered the explanations. So I danced with my husband. I spoke to friends. I ate a piece of our own wedding cake. And for the next several hours, I refused to let my parents become the most important people in the room. It wasn't until later, after the last guests were leaving and Ryan and I had finally made it upstairs to our suite, that I let myself think about Henry's question again. I had kicked off my shoes and was sitting on the edge of the bed when Ryan loosened his tie and asked, Are we pretending that didn't happen until tomorrow? We're postponing it until evidence exists. He smiled. There she is. What? The woman who gives every presentation a version number even when she's the only person editing it. That habit has saved us more than once. You once renamed a dinner menu draft because you sent me 3 versions. They were almost identical. Exactly. 6 months later, nobody remembers which version they approved. They remember whichever version helps them. Ryan pointed at me. That sentence sounds ominous in retrospect. At the time, it was just a joke. I wish I could tell you I immediately understood how important that habit would become. I didn't. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. The email came from Henry's assistant. Henry had apparently mentioned our conversation on his way out, and because Caroline's question concerned landscape scope, his assistant had forwarded the proposal Carter Residential Group had sent them. The message itself was harmless. Henry thought I already knew about it. That assumption was the first problem. I opened the attachment. The cover showed one of Dad's recent houses. Beautiful stonework. Expansive windows. The kind of project Carter Residential Group wanted more of. I moved through the first pages. Company history. Construction process. Project management. Selected residences. Then I reached a section titled Design Resources. My hand stopped on the trackpad. I knew the photograph before I read anything beneath it. A long limestone terrace ran behind a house in Fairfield County. A row of mature hornbeams softened the western property line. Beyond them, the lawn dropped gently toward a narrow, reflecting pool. My office had designed every inch of it. I kept scrolling. Another project. Mine. Then another. Mine too. They were not all photographs I personally owned. Some had been shot by architects or professional photographers under different licensing arrangements. But that wasn't what made my stomach tighten. It was the text beside them. Morrow Landscape Studio. My firm. My name. A professional award we had received 2 years earlier. Then a sentence under a heading about Carter Residential Group's collaborative approach. Landscape expertise available through our extended family design network. I read it twice. Ryan came around behind me. What is that? I don't know. That's your company. Yes. Do you work with your dad? No. Have you ever? No. That answer needed no qualification. I had never been retained by Carter Residential Group. We had never signed a consulting agreement. My firm had never been one of their standing design partners. I had answered a few casual questions for Dad over the years, because families ask each other things. He had once texted me a photograph of a dying tree. Another time he wanted to know whether a retaining wall looked too high. That was family conversation. It was not a design network. Ryan leaned closer to the screen. Could they mean that they can refer someone to you? Then they should say they can refer someone to me. You think Henry believed you were part of this? I think Caroline asked him a question about the design team because something in here made her believe I might be. I wanted to call Dad. My phone was right beside me. I could already hear his answer. Morgan, you're overthinking it. Morgan, everybody knows what we mean. Morgan, it's marketing. Then Mom would join. You sent me those photos. You should be proud Dad wanted to show your work. Why does everything have to become a fight? I didn't call. Instead, I downloaded the email in its original form. I saved the proposal exactly as it had been sent. I saved a separate copy for review, wrote down the time I had received it, and made a note not to alter the original file. Ryan watched me. Romantic wedding night. I'll stop in 5 minutes. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I meant that too. My parents had already taken enough space in the evening. I forwarded the original message and attachment to Elena Ruiz, the outside attorney my firm used when contracts or intellectual property questions became complicated. I kept the email short. Elena, I received this tonight from a prospective client of my father's company. Morrow has no affiliation with Carter Residential Group, and I did not authorize any representation of my availability. Please tell me what I should preserve before I ask my family anything. Then I closed the laptop. The following morning, I would start asking questions. But that night, sitting in my wedding dress with my husband beside me, I still believed I was dealing with one proposal that had gone too far. I had no idea my mother had been collecting pieces of my career for years. I had no idea my father had already told other clients that I would eventually appear. And I definitely had no idea that the people who spent years pretending I was just a gardener had been using my name precisely because they knew it was worth something. All I knew was what sat on the screen in front of me. Landscape expertise available through our extended family design network. I had never joined that network. By the time I was finished finding out how many people had been told otherwise, my father would lose far more than an argument at my wedding. Elena called me at 8:30 the next morning, which was later than I expected and earlier than I wanted after a wedding that had ended sometime after midnight. Ryan was downstairs getting coffee when my phone vibrated across the nightstand. I answered before it reached the second ring. Elena did not congratulate me until after she had confirmed that I had saved the original email, the attachment, and the message headers. That was one of the reasons I liked her. She understood that sometimes the nicest thing you could do for someone was deal with the problem before commenting on the flowers. I looked at the proposal, she said. First thing, don't call this fraud. Not yet. I didn't. You thought it. I definitely thought it. That's fine. Think whatever you want. Just don't put it in writing. I sat up against the headboard and pulled the blanket over my knees. How bad is it? That depends on facts we don't have yet. The language is careful. They don't say you're employed by Carter Residential Group. They don't say Morrow signed a subcontract. They don't promise a specific number of hours from you. What they do is put your firm, your work, and your credentials beside language about an extended family design network that can create an impression without making a clean, factual statement. So it's misleading? Possibly. But I want you thinking in smaller questions first. I heard pages turning on her end. Which photos do you actually control? Which ones belong to photographers or architects? Where did Carter get them? Who received this version? What exactly did Robert say in conversations around it? Did anyone rely on your involvement when making a decision? Those answers matter more than whether the deck made you angry. It did. I assumed. What should I do before I talk to them? Nothing dramatic. Keep everything. Don't alter files. Don't demand they delete anything yet, because you may want to know what existed. If you have the conversation, keep it narrow, then send a written summary afterward. And Morgan? Yeah? Your parents are not the legal question. That irritated me more than it should have. What does that mean? It means whether they were rude to you last night and whether their company represented your firm appropriately are two different problems. Don't let the first one contaminate your handling of the second. I stared at the pale strip of October light coming through the curtains. That sounds annoyingly reasonable. It's why you pay me. Not enough, apparently. She laughed, then told me to enjoy the morning if I could and call after I had actual facts. By the time I hung up, Ryan had returned carrying coffee and 2 pastries wrapped in paper. He handed me mine and said, "You have the face." What face? The one that says a lawyer told you not to do the satisfying thing. She told me not to accuse anyone of fraud. That does sound less satisfying. I told him what Elena had said. Ryan listened without trying to turn himself into a business advisor, which I appreciated more than I knew how to explain. He knew medicine. I knew design. Neither of us needed the other to pretend expertise just to prove we were supportive. Our family brunch was scheduled for 11 at the hotel. I had considered skipping it, but that would have made the morning about my parents again. So I showered, put on a cream sweater and trousers, tied my hair back, and went downstairs with my husband, like a woman who had gotten married the day before, rather than a prosecutor about to cross-examine her father. The brunch was small compared with the reception. Close family, wedding party, a few out-of-town relatives. Ashley was already there when we arrived, perfectly put together in a navy dress and drinking coffee beside our mother. She looked at me, then at Ryan, then back at me. Survived? Barely. The groom turned out to be difficult. Ryan put a hand to his chest. I knew this would come out eventually. Ashley smiled. Mom did not. That told me she had already discussed the previous night with Dad. I waited until most people had finished eating before I asked my parents to step into a quiet seating area off the lobby. Ryan came with me, but stayed a few feet away. Ashley followed without being invited. which made sense once you remembered she was vice president of business development at Carter Residential Group. Dad sat first and crossed one ankle over his knee. "Well," he said, "you wanted to talk." I took out my phone and opened the proposal. "Why is Morrow Landscape Studio in the Blackwell proposal?" He barely looked at the screen. "Because your family." That wasn't my question. Mum Sahil. Morgan. No, I'm asking something straightforward. Why is my firm presented as part of Dad's design resources? Ashley leaned forward. It isn't presented as part of the company. I turned the screen toward her. Then what does landscape expertise available through our extended family design network mean? She read it. That's marketing language. Marketing language for what? For the fact that Dad knows people in different disciplines. Does Dad know he can use my firm? Dad finally looked irritated. I know my daughter. That's not the same thing. Oh, for God's sake. He looked at Ryan as if expecting him to appreciate how difficult I was being. Ryan took a sip of coffee and said nothing. Dad turned back to me. Nobody said you worked for us. You used my firm name. We referenced your work. You used my award. Public information. You used project images. Mom jumped in. Images you sent me. That made me pause. Which images? The ones from your projects. You send things all the time. For what? Does it matter? Yes. She looked offended by the answer. I've asked you for photographs for charity events, the Christmas letter, the house tour, things like that. You always send them. Ashley nodded. Those are the materials we were given. There it was. Not proof of anything yet, but a pathway. I looked at Ashley. Who is we? Business development. You used files Mom gave you? Sometimes. Did you ask where she got them? Ashley's expression hardened. Do you ask for a chain of custody every time your mother sends you a family photograph? If I'm putting it in a client proposal, yes. Dad leaned back. This is exactly what I mean. You take something normal and turn it into a courtroom. I called my lawyer this morning, Dad. She specifically told me this is not a courtroom. His eyes narrowed. You called a lawyer? I sent my counsel a proposal that uses my company. Mom stared at me as though I had hired armed guards. 24 hours after your wedding. About 8 hours, actually. Morgan, what would you have preferred? That I waited until the honeymoon was over and hoped nobody else received it? Dad held up one hand. Enough. Here's what happened. We are pitching an integrated approach. Clients at that level want to know we have access to specialists. Architects, interior people, landscape people. You are a landscape architect. You are also my daughter. Saying we have a family design network is not some criminal conspiracy. I didn't say it was. You brought in an attorney, because I run a company. And I don't? That was the first moment I saw what this was doing to him emotionally. Not guilt. Competition. He heard my insistence on professional boundaries as a challenge to his identity as the person in the family who understood business. I know you run a company, I said. Which is why I assumed you'd understand that one company doesn't get to imply access to another without permission. He stared at me. We never said you worked here. Then why not write that Morrow is an independent firm owned by your daughter and that clients are welcome to contact us separately? His jaw tightened. Ashley answered before he did. Because that's clunky. That's also accurate. Marketing isn't a legal deposition. No. But it's still supposed to represent something real. Mom set her cup down too hard. This is becoming absurd. Your father is proud of you. He included your work because he is proud of you, and now you are sitting here acting like he stole your identity. Dad did not say he was proud of me. That mattered more than Mom probably realized. Instead, he said, Henry knows what the proposal says. He's an experienced businessman. Nobody tricked him. Henry asked me whether I was part of the design team. That landed. Ashley looked at Dad. Mom's expression changed. Dad recovered quickly. So something in your proposal or your conversations made him think I might be? He asked a question. Yes, that is what clients do. Then answer mine. Did you tell Henry I would be available? No. The answer came fast. I watched him for another second. Did anyone at Carter tell him Morrow would be available? I don't monitor every sentence my employees say. Ashley looked at him. That tiny reaction stayed with me. At the time, I thought she was annoyed that he had casually included her department in the possibility of error. Later, I understood there was more to it. But that morning, all I knew was that my father had moved from, "We never said you worked here," to, "I don't monitor every sentence my employees say." In less than 10 minutes, I looked at Ashley. "How are major proposals approved?" She hesitated. Dad answered for her. "Professionally." That wasn't the question either. He exhaled through his nose. Ashley said, "Business development prepares them. Project leadership reviews technical material. Dad approves major submissions." "Everyone?" Dad gave a humorless laugh. "Morgan, we have controls. We don't throw random PowerPoints at clients." Ashley added, "The platform tracks versions and comments. We need to know which deck was final." I looked at her. "Comments too?" "Yes." Dad spread his hands as if this proved his point. "Exactly. We are not amateurs." I nodded. "Good." Something in my tone bothered him. "Why did you say it like that?" "Because if everyone agrees there's nothing wrong with the proposal, nobody should be worried about preserving the record of how it was approved." Mom looked at me sharply. "You came here looking for a fight." "No. If I wanted a fight, I would have started one last night." "You embarrassed your father last night." I almost smiled. Henry embarrassed Dad by knowing me? You know what I mean. I really don't. Dad leaned forward. "Let's stop pretending this is about language. You're angry because I made a joke. I was angry because you insulted me at my wedding." "That is separate." "It obviously isn't." "It is to me." He shook his head. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Decide you're above the family, then punish everyone because we don't speak your language." That sentence would have hurt me more 10 years earlier. At 38, it mostly made me tired. "I'm not asking you to speak my language. I'm asking you not to sell my availability." "Nobody sold your availability." "Then put that in writing." Silence. Ashley looked from me to Dad. Mom said, "You cannot possibly expect your father to sign some statement over a family misunderstanding." I didn't ask for a signed statement. I said I'm putting my boundary in writing. I took out my phone again. "From now on, Carter Residential Group does not use Morrow's name, my biography, my awards, or wording that implies my availability without written permission from me or my firm. If there are materials already circulating, I want to know what they are." Dad laughed once. "You want my client list?" "I want to know where my company has been represented." "Same thing." "No. To you. To anyone who understands the difference between a client list and a distribution list for specific material." Ashley rubbed her temple. "Morgan, do you hear yourself?" "Yes. You've been married for less than 24 hours. And my company was still in Dad's proposal before I got married." That ended that line of argument. I stood. "I'm sending the boundary by email so there's no confusion. I'm not asking anyone to respond right now. I'm also not discussing this with relatives, guests, or social media. If Henry asks me whether Morrow is engaged on his project, I will tell him the truth." Dad's face tightened. "Do not poison that relationship. I don't control your relationship with Henry. You know exactly what you could do." "Yes, I could lie for you. I'm not going to." His eyes flashed. "I didn't ask you to lie." "Then we agree." Ryan stood beside me. Mom looked at him. "And you're comfortable with this?" He glanced at me first, then back at her. "I'm comfortable with Morgan answering questions about her own company." Mom looked disappointed, as though a husband's proper role was to explain his wife back into obedience. We returned to brunch. I did not announce anything. I did not tell my cousins my parents had used my firm in a proposal. I hugged my aunt goodbye, thanked Ryan's parents for staying an extra night, and spent 20 minutes talking to one of my college friends about the terrible shoes she had chosen for dancing. That afternoon, I sent the email exactly as I had described. I kept it boring. No accusations, no references to the wedding, no threats. I wrote that Morrow Landscape Studio had no standing partnership, subcontracting agreement, or automatic consulting relationship with Carter Residential Group. Going forward, Carter was not authorized to use Morrow's name, my professional biography, award references, or language suggesting my availability without written consent. Elena reviewed it before I sent it. Dad replied 43 minutes later. "Noted." We disagree with your characterization of prior materials. That was all. Mom texted me separately. You really had to make this official? I stared at the message for a moment, then put my phone down. Ryan found me packing later that evening. You answering that? No. Boundary? No. Efficiency. He smiled. We were leaving for our honeymoon 2 days later. For one afternoon, I considered moving the trip. Not canceling it forever, just delaying it until I knew what Dad had done. Then I realized what that would mean. My parents would have taken a stupid joke at my wedding, turned it into a business problem, and somehow acquired the next 10 days of my marriage too. I refused. I told Elena to contact me only if something required an actual decision that could not wait. Claire, my senior designer, already had authority to keep normal projects moving. Ryan and I packed. I closed my laptop. The morning before we left, Henry emailed me directly. His message was polite. Caroline asked me to confirm whether Morrow is expected to participate in our renovation if we proceed with Carter. Robert's proposal seemed to suggest there may be a family design relationship. I don't want to make assumptions. I read it twice. There was nothing accusatory in his tone. That almost made it worse. This was what careful people did when something did not quite line up. They asked. I forwarded it to Elena and called her. What do I say? The truth. I know that. Which version of the truth? The smallest accurate version. That was another reason I paid her. So I wrote, Thanks for checking. Morrow Landscape Studio does not currently have an engagement, subcontract, or availability commitment related to the Carter proposal or your renovation. If that changes in the future, it would require a separate written agreement. I did not add. My father apparently forgot to tell me I was in his network. I did not add. You should reconsider hiring him. I did not tell Henry anything about my mother, the wedding, or the argument at brunch. I answered his business question. He replied less than an hour later. Understood. Thank you for clarifying. That was it. No billionaire rage. No threat. No promise to destroy Dad. Just a man making a note in whatever file he kept on a contractor he was considering hiring. And that was when something finally settled in my mind. My father had spent the morning insisting nobody had misrepresented anything. Henry had spent less than 1 minute writing an email because he had clearly come away with an impression that was not true. Both things could not comfortably exist together. That evening, as I finished packing, I thought about Ashley describing their proposal system. Versions. Comments. Approvals. Dad had said no major submission left Carter Residential Group without controls. At the time, he had said it to prove how professional his company was. I remembered it for a different reason. If the Blackwell proposal was an innocent misunderstanding, then the records would show how it became one. And if it wasn't, the records would show that too. I zipped my suitcase and went on my honeymoon. For 10 days, I chose my husband over my parents' crisis. When I came home, I intended to find out whether Henry Blackwell was the first client Carter Residential Group had ever led toward the wrong assumption about me. He wasn't. We got back from our honeymoon on a Sunday evening, and the first thing I did Monday morning was go to my office instead of my parents' house. That decision probably sounds obvious. At the time, it did not feel obvious. There was a part of me that wanted to drive straight to Stamford, put the Blackwell proposal on my father's desk, and demand every name, every deck, every client, every explanation. But I had spent 10 days refusing to let my parents turn my honeymoon into an extension of their problem, and I was not going to come home and immediately hand them my entire week. Morrow Landscape Studio occupied the second floor of a converted brick building in Westport, with tall windows overlooking a narrow strip of trees behind the parking lot. It was not a giant firm. That was intentional. I had built it around selective work, long-term clients, and a team small enough that I still knew what everyone was working on without needing 3 layers of management between me and the drawings. Claire Donovan was already at her desk when I walked in. She looked up, smiled, then pointed at my left hand. So it happened. It did. And you came back? Barely. Should I be offended that you're here before 9? Yes. She stood and hugged me. For the next 40 minutes, I talked about work. Real work. A grading revision on a property outside Greenwich. A pool consultant waiting on dimensions. A planting plan that needed one more pass before it went to the architect. A client whose mature oak had developed a problem while I was away. Claire tried to give me an escape route. I can take the Greenwich call. No. You just got back. I also own the company. You got married. I was aware. She laughed. I'm serious, I can take it. I know you can. That's why you work here. I'm still taking it. That mattered to me. I did not want my team quietly paying for a problem my family had created. I had hired good people so the firm could function without me for 10 days. That did not mean I intended to return and dump another month of my responsibilities on them while I investigated my father. By 10:30, the normal work was moving again. Only then did I call Elena. She had spent the previous week reviewing the proposal and the material I had sent her. She had also managed, as promised, not to interrupt my honeymoon with anything that did not require an immediate decision. I have good news, she said. I don't believe lawyers when they open with that. The good news is nobody burned the building down while you were gone. And the bad news? You sent me a list demanding removal of every photograph connected to your projects. I leaned back in my chair. Yes, you do not control every one of those photographs. I know who designed the projects. That is not the same thing as owning every photograph of them. I closed my eyes. She continued. Some were shot under agreements with architects. Some were commissioned by homeowners. At least one appears to have been licensed to a publication. We need to separate 3 things: your work, your name, and the rights in the images themselves. I know that. You know it now. That irritated me, mostly because she was right. The night before, I had gone through the Blackwell deck again and written an aggressive list of everything I wanted removed. I had been looking at those images as evidence of my work, not as intellectual property with different ownership and licensing arrangements. It was a professional mistake, not a catastrophic one, but mine. So we narrow it, I said. Exactly. What can I cleanly control? Your firm name, your professional biography, statements implying an affiliation or your availability. Any materials Morrow actually owns or licensed under terms that don't permit this use. For the rest, we verify. I tapped a pencil against my desk. I moved too fast. Yes, you sound happy about that. I am always happy when a client notices before filing something stupid. I didn't file anything. Then today is already going well. I smiled despite myself. This was one of the things I had learned running a business. Being decisive was useful. Being emotionally committed to every first decision was not. If the facts changed, the strategy changed. I rewrote my list. That afternoon, I pulled the Blackwell proposal up beside our public website. I was not trying to play detective. I was trying to answer one narrow question Elena had asked me before the honeymoon. Where had Carter gotten the material? At first, the answer seemed simple. A lot of our projects appeared publicly. Morrow had been featured in regional design publications. We maintained a portfolio. Architects tagged us in finished work. If Dad's marketing team had simply collected public material, that was one kind of problem. Then I noticed a photograph from a Fairfield County project. The photograph itself was familiar. The crop was not. Our website showed the full terrace, including the outer edge of the pool and a line of hornbeams on the western property line. Dad's proposal cut the image tighter. That was not unusual by itself. What caught my attention was a tiny piece of text at the bottom edge. Most people would never have seen it. I did because I had put it there. Melfets better, stiri. A press kit code. I enlarged the image. Brian had teased me on our wedding night about my obsession with file versions. Claire had teased me about it for years. Every press package leaving Morrow had a small internal code attached to the exported files. Project, intended use, revision number. Not because I expected anyone to steal them. Because design offices generate dozens of nearly identical versions of everything, and nothing destroys an afternoon faster than discovering 5 people are arguing over 3 PDFs called Final. I opened our archive. The file in Dad's proposal was not the public web version. It came from a press package. I searched the code. One result. 4 years earlier. Subject, Westport House Tour Materials. Recipient, Diane Carter. I stared at my mother's name. Claire passed my office and stopped. That face again. What face? The one where something has annoyed you enough that you've become completely calm. Come look at this. She stepped inside. I showed her the image in the Carter proposal, then the archive entry. Same crop? Same exact exported file. Could she have forwarded it? Of course. To your dad? Probably. To someone else? Also possible. Claire leaned against the desk. So what does it prove? That the image didn't come from the public website. That's all? That's all. She nodded. I appreciated that. No dramatic declaration that we had caught my mother. No pretending a source trail proved intent. It proved one thing. At least one piece of material in my father's sales deck had come from a file I had sent directly to my mother for a specific event. That was enough for now. I called Elena. She asked the same question Claire had. What does this prove? That exact file came from the press kit I sent Mom. Good. What does it not prove? That she knowingly authorized it for commercial proposals. That Dad knew where it came from. That anyone lied. Excellent. You really enjoy making this less satisfying. I enjoy making it defensible. She told me to save the archive entry, preserve the email, and not confront my mother yet. I agreed. Then I did something Elena had not asked me to do. I called my father, not because I expected honesty, because I wanted a direct answer to one question. How many Carter proposals have included Morrow? He was silent for a moment. Then he said, Hello to you too. Hi, Dad. How many? Morgan, I'm in the middle of a workday. So am I. You've been home 12 hours, closer to 16. Did you enjoy the honeymoon? Yes. Good. Maybe you should hold on to that feeling instead of restarting this nonsense. I looked out my office window. I'm asking for the distribution list for materials that used my firm. You're asking for my client list. No, that is exactly what you're asking. If you sent the same deck to 6 people, tell me the 6 recipients. I don't need your entire database. You don't get to audit my company. I'm not auditing your company. You've hired a lawyer, you're tracing photographs, and now you want client names. I'm tracing my company. He gave a short laugh. This is what I mean when I say you've become impossible. You never said I was impossible until I stopped letting you define normal. There was a pause. I heard office noise behind him. A door. Somebody talking at a distance. Then Dad lowered his voice. Are you interrogating your mother now? No. You're digging through things she sent you. I'm looking through my own archive. Same difference. It really isn't. She's upset. That doesn't answer my question. You always do this. Ask for answers. Turn everything into some principle. I almost told him that principles were usually what people complained about when convenience stopped working in their favor. Instead, I stayed with the question. How many proposals? I don't know. Who would? Ashley's team. Can I ask Ashley? No. He sat back. That was fast. Because this has gone far enough. Then answer it. I told you. I don't know. You also told me every major proposal gets reviewed. It does. Then there are records. His voice hardened. Stay out of my company. There it was. Not an answer. A boundary. I almost admired the irony. I will, I said. Stay out of mine. Then I ended the call. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clearer. If Dad had handed me a list that day, I might have believed this was a sloppy marketing practice that had spread further than he realized. Instead, he had refused to tell me how far my own firm had traveled inside his sales process. So I stopped asking him. That did not mean I went hunting through private databases or calling random Carter clients. The Blackwell proposal itself gave me enough to work with. Near the back, Carter had included several completed projects as examples of its work. One of those projects was a large residential renovation outside Greenwich. The homeowner's name was not hidden. Dad's company had publicized the finished house before. The project had appeared in a local architecture feature. I knew the house. I had never worked on it. But under the description of the project, the Blackwell deck used language about Carter's integrated design relationships. I showed it to Elena. Can we ask them one question? What question? Whether Morrow was ever represented to them as part of the team. She was quiet. Through me. Fine. And we keep it neutral. Fine. No accusation. Elena. I know you know. I also know your father called you impossible yesterday. That is unrelated. Good answer. The email went out that afternoon. It was short. Morrow Landscape Studio had recently become aware that its name and work had appeared in certain Carter Residential Group marketing materials. We were confirming the scope of any historical representations involving Morrow. Had Morrow Landscape Studio or I personally ever been represented to them as a current or expected participant in their Carter project? That was it. No family story. No wedding. No billionaire. No accusation. The homeowner replied the next morning. His name was Thomas Avery. His first sentence was, "I assumed you knew." I read the rest twice. According to Thomas, when he and his wife had hired Carter almost 2 years earlier, Dad had described Morrow as part of a group of specialists he could bring in as the project developed. Thomas remembered my name because his wife had looked up my firm afterward. At first, that still sounded ambiguous. Dad could easily have meant referral, access, possibility. Then Thomas wrote something that made me sit straighter. I believe Robert said you would become involved when we reached the landscape phase. I may still have the email. I forwarded the message to Elena. 2 hours later, Thomas sent another email. This one had an attachment. The thread was almost 2 years old. I opened it. Thomas had asked Dad whether the outside spaces would be handled by the same team after the structural work. Dad's reply was 4 lines. The third line was the one that mattered. Morgan usually becomes involved as we move into the landscape phase. I read it again. Usually. Becomes involved. Not could. Not I can refer you. Not you may want to contact her firm independently. Usually becomes involved. Ryan was working that morning, so I did not call him. Claire was in a client meeting. Elena had warned me repeatedly not to treat every new document as a verdict. So I sat alone in my office and let myself understand exactly what I had. Thomas Avery was not suing anyone. He was not demanding money. He was not claiming his entire contract had been based on me. His project was done. His landscape had ultimately been handled by another designer, and at the time, Carter had simply told him schedules had shifted and they were using someone else. Thomas had accepted that. Why wouldn't he? Clients changed consultants all the time. The important part was earlier. Before I had ever known Thomas Avery existed, my father had used my name to describe how his company normally operated. I called Elena. You have it? Yes. What do you think? I think your father made a more specific representation than the Blackwell deck did. Thank you. That is not the same as saying we know the full pattern. I know. Do you? Yes. Good. What do you want to do? That question stopped me. A month earlier, I might have said I wanted my parents to admit what they had done. That answer was becoming less interesting. I want to know how they got comfortable saying this. Elena was quiet for a second. That is a better question. I looked again at the old email. Dad had written it casually. That was what bothered me most. There was no hesitation in the sentence. No explanation. No request that Thomas contact me. Nothing indicating Dad was making an exception or hoping I might agree. He wrote as if my future involvement were part of a routine process, as if it had already been decided. As if my calendar, my staff, my license, my client commitments, and my answer were details he could solve later. I thought about the exact press kit file that had come from my mother. I thought about Ashley saying business development used materials they had been given. I thought about Dad refusing to tell me where those materials had gone. For years, I had believed my family's biggest problem with my career was that they did not respect it. That explanation was becoming harder to defend. People who thought my work was worthless did not put my awards in proposals. People who thought I was just a gardener did not tell clients I would join multi-million-dollar projects later. Maybe they did not respect me, but they understood something about my value. They understood it well enough to sell it. Thomas's email was almost 2 years old. Henry Blackwell was not the first client my father had led toward the idea that I would appear. Henry was only the first one who had happened to mention it while I was standing there. And if my father had been talking about my involvement for that long, I was beginning to understand that the Blackwell proposal had not gone too far by accident. It had come from somewhere. The next question was where. The email from Thomas Avery changed the question I was asking. Until then, I had been trying to determine whether my father's company had used my work improperly. After I read his sentence about me, usually, becoming involved in the landscape phase, I stopped wondering whether the Blackwell proposal had been an isolated mistake. It clearly was not. What I needed to understand next was how a sentence like that had become normal inside Carter Residential Group. The answer led me back to my mother. The press kit code on the photograph in Henry's proposal had already told me that one exact image had not come from Morrow's public website. It had come from a package I had sent Diane years earlier. I pulled up the old email again and stared at the subject line. Westport House Tour Materials. I remembered the event vaguely. A local charity had organized a tour of several renovated homes, and Mom had been involved in one of the committees. One of Morrow's projects was being mentioned in a brochure because the property owner had agreed to participate. Diane had called me twice asking for photographs, a short biography, and whatever press language would make the garden sound impressive without becoming too technical. He has sent her a folder. At the time, it had felt harmless. I did not remember the exact wording of my email, only the general exchange. She needed images for the house tour. I gave them to her. End of story. Except apparently it had not ended there. I called Mom late that afternoon. She answered on the third ring. I was wondering how long it would take. How long what would take for you to call me. Her tone was already defensive. I need to ask you about the house tour materials I sent you a few years ago. There was a pause. Oh, for heaven's sake. That's not an answer. You're still doing this? Yes. You got married almost a month ago. And the email Dad sent Thomas Avery is almost 2 years old. That stopped her. I could hear the change in her breathing. Who? Thomas Avery. I don't know who that is. He was a Carter client. Morgan, your father has had hundreds of clients. He has an email from Dad saying I usually become involved during the landscape phase. She said nothing. I waited. Finally, she said, maybe your father expected you would. He never asked me. You would have helped if he'd asked. No. That answer came out so quickly that even I surprised myself. Mom recovered first. That is exactly the problem with you. What is? You always make everything so absolute. Was I retained on the Avery project? I don't know. Did anyone ask me to be? I don't know. Then there's nothing absolute about my answer, it's just factual. She sighed. I'm not doing this over the phone. Good. I'd rather see the materials anyway. What materials? The ones I sent you. You think I still have something from 4 years ago? Yes. She laughed in a way that was meant to make me feel ridiculous. The problem was that I knew my mother. Diane Carter kept everything. Birthday invitations, Christmas cards, newspaper clippings, programs from school plays nobody had enjoyed. If one of us appeared in a magazine, she bought 3 copies and stored 2 in plastic sleeves. She had drawers full of wedding stationery samples from weddings that had ended in divorce. If I had sent her a folder of professional photographs, she had not deleted it. Come by Thursday, she said finally. I'll show you whatever I have, and then maybe you can stop acting like your father built his company by stealing your flower pictures. I closed my eyes. They're not flower pictures. There, that tone. What tone? The one where you talk down to everyone. That one landed because it was not entirely wrong. I had become impatient with my family years ago, and impatience sometimes turned into contempt before I noticed it happening. I took a second before answering. You're right, I sounded condescending. Mom went quiet. I think she had expected denial. I still need to see what you have. Well, at least we agree on something. We did not, but Thursday was better than nothing. I told Elena about the conversation before I went. She did not come with me. We were not at the stage where I wanted every family interaction conducted through attorneys, and Elena agreed, but she told me to keep one rule in mind. Look at what she voluntarily shows you. Don't start copying folders off her laptop. I know you know. I also know you're angry. I'm not going to steal my mother's computer. Good. That would make my week much worse. I drove to my parents' house Thursday afternoon after finishing a client meeting in Greenwich. The drive to Stamford gave me too much time to think. For most of my adult life, I had told myself that the healthiest thing I had ever done was stop trying to make my parents understand my work. When I started Morrow, Dad asked why I did not call it Carter Landscape. I told him because that was not its name. When I hired my first employee, Mom asked whether I really needed staff already. When we won our first regional design award, Dad congratulated me, then asked whether awards like that actually helped sell anything. I had stopped explaining. Maybe that had been healthy. Maybe some of it had also been lazy. There is a difference between refusing to seek validation and refusing to pay attention. I was beginning to see that I had confused those things more than once. Mom was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived. Dad was still at work. Ashley was not there. For once, that was probably better. Mom had made coffee, which was her preferred way of pretending a difficult conversation was simply a visit. I did not take the bait. "Do you still have the house tour folder?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she went to the small desk near the breakfast room and brought back her laptop. "I have a lot of things you've sent me. That's what I'm trying to understand. You're acting like this is sinister. I haven't called it anything. You don't have to." I can hear it. She sat beside me and opened the computer. Her desktop was exactly what I expected from Diane Carter. Too many folders. Screenshots. Event documents. Scanned invitations. Family photographs, labeled by year. She typed my name into the search bar. A folder appeared almost immediately. Morgan Materials. I stared at it. Mom noticed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I didn't say anything. You looked at me. What's in it?" "Things about you." She double-clicked. Inside were folders. Awards. Press. Project images. Bios. I could have accepted that. A mother collecting articles about her daughter was not evidence of wrongdoing. Even a mother who routinely mocked that daughter's work could still be proud in her own complicated way. Then I saw the next folder. Client decks. I leaned closer. Mom moved the cursor. "What's that?" "Nothing important. You named it client decks. Your father has presentations. Sometimes he asks me for nice images. So you do give Carter Materials." "I never said I didn't. You said you kept this because you were proud of me. I am proud of you. Those things can both be true." She looked at me sharply. That was one of the strangest moments of the entire story. My mother had expected me to accuse her. Instead, I had simply stated the obvious. She could be proud of me and use me at the same time. Those were not mutually exclusive. Maybe that was why the truth had been so hard for me to see. Mom clicked into the press folder. Magazine PDFs. A newspaper interview. A profile from a design publication. An award announcement from 6 years earlier. I recognized all of them. Then she opened Project Images. The exact Fairfield County photograph from Henry's proposal was there. Same crop. Same code. Mel fce per shtiri. I pointed at it. That file came from the house, tour package. So? It wasn't on my public site. You sent it to me. For a charity brochure. She crossed her arms. "You are my daughter. I didn't think I needed a licensing agreement to show your father a photograph. Showing Dad a photograph isn't what we're talking about. You don't know what we're talking about because you've already decided what happened." I looked back at the screen. Several files had Carter in the name. Not all. Enough. One was called Carter, Luxury, Reference. Another was inside client decks. I did not open it. I wanted to. That mattered. It would have been easy to reach over, click the folder, start scrolling, maybe email myself whatever looked useful. But it was not my computer. Mom had opened it voluntarily to show me something. That did not turn the rest of the laptop into my evidence locker, so I kept my hands in my lap. "Can you show me what's in client decks?" She closed the laptop. That answered more than another 5 minutes of arguing would have. "I think we're done. I haven't touched anything. You're sitting here analyzing my folders like I'm on trial. I'm trying to understand how my work got into Dad's proposal. And I told you, I shared things with your father. Did you know they were going into client proposals?" She stood. "I knew he used materials sometimes. Did you know he was telling clients I usually joined projects later?" I don't know what your father says to every client. That was almost the same answer Dad had given me. I watched her walk toward the coffee machine, even though neither of us needed more coffee. Did you tell Ashley I gave permission? Mom stopped. That was enough. I waited. She turned around slowly. What did Ashley say? She said business development used approved family materials. She probably meant I gave them the materials. That isn't what I asked. Mom's face changed. You are turning your sister against us now? No. You dragged her into this. She works in business development. So now her job makes her guilty? I didn't say guilty. You keep saying you didn't say things while making sure everyone knows exactly what you mean. I stood. I'm asking one question. Did you tell Ashley I approved Carter using my materials? Mom picked up her coffee. I told her you knew we used your things. That's different. No, Morgan, it isn't. Yes, it is. Her voice sharpened. You have always known your father was proud of what you do. I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny about it anymore. Dad called me a gardener at my wedding. He jokes. He told a client I usually join projects. He probably thought you would. You told Ashley I knew. Because you did. What exactly did I know? Mom opened her mouth, then stopped. That silence followed me all the way home. I called Ashley that evening. She answered with, "What now?" I saw Mom's folder. Pause. What folder? Morgan Materials. Oh, that bothered me. You knew about it. I knew she kept stuff about you. She has a client Dex folder. Ashley exhaled. Morgan, I'm not doing another interrogation. I'm not interrogating you. You always say that right before asking 12 questions. Fine. One question. Where did business development get the Morrow images? From Mom sometimes. Did she tell you I approved them? Yes. The answer came immediately. What did she show you? I don't remember. Did you ever see an email from me giving Carter permission to use Morrow commercially? Ashley went quiet. That's very specific. It needs to be. I saw things you'd sent, Mom. That isn't permission. She said you were fine with it. Did you verify that? I didn't think I needed to. That was the first truly honest thing Ashley had said about it. Not malicious. Not exonerating either. She had accepted the answer that made her job easier. Why not? Because you send Mom stuff all the time. Because Dad's company is our family company. Because nobody was pretending to be you. Dad told Thomas Avery I usually become involved during landscape phase. I don't know who Thomas Avery is. Yes, you do. Carter Project outside Greenwich. Almost 2 years ago. I handle a lot of accounts. Did you work on that proposal? I don't remember. Can you check? No. Why? Because Dad told me not to. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Ashley heard it. What? Nothing. No, say it. Dad says there's nothing wrong with any of this, but nobody is allowed to show me anything. You're asking for company records. I'm asking whether my name was used. You're asking me to go against Dad. That's not the same question. It is when you work for him. There it was. The problem Ashley and I had always had. She interpreted loyalty vertically. Dad was above her in the company and above us in the family. So disagreement with him automatically became disloyalty. I had never believed that. Ashley had built a career inside it. Did Mom ever show you actual written permission from me? I told you I don't remember. That means no. That means I don't remember. Fine. Morgan. What? You're acting like we all sat in a room and planned to steal your life. I don't think that. Could have fooled me. I think Dad wanted better sales materials. I think Mom gave you my work. I think you used it because she told you it was fine. What I don't know yet is how far any of you went. Ashley was quiet. Then she said something that stayed with me. Mom always said you knew. Not thought. Not assumed. Said. You believed her? Yes. Why? Another pause. Because you never cared when she used your stuff before. That one was fair enough to hurt. I looked around my living room. Ryan was in the kitchen making dinner, close enough to see my face but far enough not to listen. I cared about different uses differently. You never said that. I'm saying it now. Convenient. Maybe. Still true. Ashley sighed. I have to go. One more thing. You said one question 15 questions ago. Did you ever ask Mom whether I had actually approved Carter using my work? I don't remember. She hung up. 2 days later, Elena sent the preservation notice. It was not a lawsuit. It did not accuse anyone of fraud. It did not demand my parents turn over their phones. It simply identified categories of records that should not be destroyed while we tried to understand the use of Morrow's materials. Client presentations containing Morrow references, source files, communications about my firm, and records relating to permissions or approvals. Carter's attorney acknowledged it. Dad called me 10 minutes later. I let it ring once before answering. You sent a preservation letter to my company. Elena did. You know what I mean. Yes. You are treating us like defendants. No, I'm making sure records don't disappear. Nobody is deleting anything. Then the letter changes nothing. You've lost your mind. I leaned back in my office chair. Dad, you won't tell me which proposals used Morrow. Mom showed me a folder with client decks and then closed her laptop when I asked to see what was in it. Ashley says Mom told her I approved the use. I have an email where you told a client I usually became involved later. What exactly would you have me do? Talk to your family? I have. No, you lawyer up. I talked to you before Elena sent that letter, because you wanted ammunition. That isn't what happened. In your version, I almost said something sharp. I stopped. There were moments when my father made it incredibly easy to become the person he accused me of being. Cold, superior, unforgiving. That was part of my flaw, too. I knew how to win arguments, and sometimes winning an argument was the least useful thing I could do. So I asked one question. Did you know Mom was sending my materials to business development? He paused. She helps with presentations sometimes. Did you know they were mine? Of course I knew they were yours. That answer was important. I wrote it down after the call. At the time, I did not know how important it would become. Dad continued. This is family. You're pretending there are walls between everything. There are walls between companies. Maybe in your world. In every world where contracts exist. He laughed without humor. You've always thought you were smarter than the rest of us. No, I think my firm is separate from yours. Same thing to you. Then Mom came onto the call. I could tell Dad had put me on speaker. Morgan, you always knew we used your things. Her voice was angry now, but underneath it was something else. Certainty. Not uncertainty. Not confusion. Certainty. You keep saying that, I said. Because it's true. What exactly did I authorize? You sent me everything. That's not an answer. You told me to use what I needed. I stopped. The room seemed to go still around me. What did you just say? You heard me. No. Say it again. Dad cut in. Don't start twisting words. I'm asking Mom to repeat hers. Mom sounded offended. You told me I could use whatever I needed from your press folder. The sentence felt familiar. Not the claim. The wording. I had written something like that. I knew I had. For the first time since Henry had walked into that conversation at my wedding, I felt something colder than anger. Doubt. I ended the call without accusing either of them of anything. Then I called Elena. Before I could finish explaining, she said, Don't guess. Find the original. Carter's counsel sent her a message the following morning. Attached was a screenshot of an old email from me to my mother. No subject line. No earlier messages. No later replies. Just one sentence highlighted in the center. Use whatever you need from the press folder. My name was underneath it. My email address. The date. It was real. I stared at the screen for a long time. There are few things more destabilizing than finding evidence against yourself. Until that moment, I had believed my parents had used my work without ever asking. Now I had to consider a different possibility. Maybe they had asked. Maybe I had said yes so casually that I had forgotten. And if that was true, then I needed to know whether I was uncovering a scheme or simply punishing my family for taking me at my word. The screenshot stayed open on my laptop for almost 20 minutes before I touched anything. Use whatever you need from the press folder. My words. My email address. My name underneath them. The date matched the period when my mother had been helping with the charity house tour. Even the spacing looked like something I would have written. There was no obvious reason to believe the sentence had been fabricated. and I refused to give myself the comfort of pretending otherwise, simply because the truth might be inconvenient. Ryan found me at the dining table after he got home from work. I had moved from my office to the house sometime after 5, but I was still staring at the same screenshot. He set his keys down, looked at the laptop, then at me. "That's the email? That's part of an email. You recognize it?" I recognized the sentence. He sat across from me. "Do you remember writing it?" "I remember sending Mom materials. I remember being annoyed because she kept asking for different formats. I remember telling her to take whatever she needed from the folder." His eyes stayed on mine. "So you might have given permission." "Yes. I said it because it was possible. That was one of the hardest things about evidence. It did not owe you emotional consistency. A document did not become fake because it complicated the story you had already started telling yourself." Ryan leaned back. "You don't sound convinced." "I'm not convinced of anything. That may be a first. Very funny. I'm serious." "So am I." I closed the laptop halfway. "If I gave Mom broad permission, that changes things." "Does it?" "Yes." "How much?" I looked at him. "If I told her she could use whatever she wanted from my press materials, and she shared those materials with Dad, I can still tell them to stop now. But I can't sit here acting like they took everything without ever asking." Ryan nodded slowly. "That seems fair. And if I was careless with the permission, that's on me." He did not rush to tell me it was not. I appreciated that. One of the reasons I trusted Ryan was that he did not confuse loving me with declaring me innocent of every mistake. He looked at the screenshot again. "Why doesn't it have a subject line?" "Because it's cropped. Is that normal?" "If somebody only wants to show one sentence, sure. Do you have the original?" "That's what I'm going to find." I reopened the laptop. Ryan stood. "Before dinner?" "Before I start building an entire theory around 6 words. That sounds healthier. It is also ruining my appetite." "I made pasta. Your appetite can recover." I almost smiled. Then my phone rang. "Ashley." For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then, I thought about what she had said during our last call. "Mom always said you knew." I answered. "What?" "That's warm. I'm looking at an email that apparently proves your point. Forgive me for skipping hello." Ashley was quiet for half a beat. "So you saw it?" "Yes." "Then can this stop now?" I felt the old impulse rise immediately. The sharp answer. The one that would make me feel better for 10 seconds and accomplish nothing. I swallowed it. "What exactly do you think it proves?" "That Mom wasn't lying." "I didn't say she was. You've spent weeks acting like she was. I've spent weeks asking what I authorized. And now you have it." "No, I have one sentence." "Oh my God, Morgan." "What?" "You cannot keep moving the line every time you don't like the answer." That one hit because, from Ashley's perspective, it probably looked exactly like that. At first, I had wanted to know whether Mom gave them my material. She had. Then, whether they believed I approved. They said I did. Now they had a screenshot that appeared to show permission, and I was saying I needed more context. I could hear how convenient that sounded. "I'm not moving the line," I said. "I'm checking the scope. You told her to use whatever she needed." "For what?" "There you go. That is not an unreasonable question. It is when everyone knows what Mom does." "What does Mom do?" "Family events, charity events, Dad's presentations sometimes. She shares things. She always has." "And you think saying yes to one thing means yes to all of those forever?" "I think if you cared this much, you should have said so then." That hurt because there was truth in it too. I had not been careful. I had trained my family to expect that I would not inspect every use because, for years, I genuinely had not cared enough to inspect them. That did not mean they owned my work, but it did mean I had helped create ambiguity. "I should have been clearer," I said. Ashley went silent. Apparently none of us knew what to do when I admitted fault. I continued. "I'm serious. If I sent Mom things and never clarified the limits, I contributed to the mess. So we're done?" "No." Her sigh was immediate. "Of course not. Because Dad still told Thomas Avery I usually became involved in projects. I never authorized that. Maybe he assumed you would. Then he should have asked me before telling a client. You would have said no." "Probably." "Exactly. I stared at the dark window over the sink. That is not the defense you think it is. You know what I mean. I do. You're saying Dad avoided asking because he thought I might refuse, and somehow that makes it okay to speak for me. That's not what I said. It's what follows. Ashley made a frustrated sound. This started because Dad made one stupid joke at your wedding. No. That's when I found out. You were embarrassed. Yes. So now you're angry. Yes. And suddenly everything Mom ever shared is some violation. I leaned back. This is the part you keep getting wrong. I'm not pretending the wedding didn't affect me. Dad humiliated me. Mom joined in. Of course I was angry, but anger doesn't make Thomas Avery's email disappear. You're going after them because you're angry. I'm checking records because I have records worth checking. Same difference. No. You really believe that? Yes. Ashley went quiet. Then she said, You always do this thing where you make your feelings sound like policy. That was sharper than I expected. What does that mean? It means you get hurt, but instead of saying you're hurt, you turn everything into rules and documents and boundaries so nobody can argue with you. I did not answer immediately, because there was truth there too. Not all truth, but enough. You think I'm doing that now? I think Dad embarrassed you, and now you want proof that you were right to be embarrassed. That sentence doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean. I did. She was accusing me of building a professional case around a personal wound. The problem was that a personal wound and a professional problem could exist at the same time. My mistake would have been pretending the first made the second impossible. My feelings are why I noticed, I said. They are not what determines whether Dad represented my firm accurately. Ashley did not respond. I continued. If the full email shows I gave broad commercial permission, I will deal with that. If it doesn't, you need to deal with that too. I already know what it says. No, you know what Mom showed you. You're calling her a liar again. No. I'm saying I want the whole email. I have to go. Ashley. What? When Mom first showed you that screenshot, did you ask to see the whole thread? She was silent long enough that I had my answer before she spoke. No. Why not? Because I didn't think I needed to. Because you trusted her? Yes. There was nothing wrong with trusting your mother. The problem was what Ashley did with that trust afterward. You also wanted it to be enough, I said. Her voice cooled. Don't psychoanalyze me. I'm not. You always think you understand everyone. That one was fair too. Maybe I do that sometimes. Another silence. You're really enjoying this new thing where you admit one flaw and then keep going anyway. Not particularly. I have work. So do I. She hung up. I sat there for another minute, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Ryan came back into the room holding 2 plates. That sounded productive. It was awful. Still productive? Unfortunately. We ate at the kitchen counter because I had lost interest in pretending dinner required ceremony. For a few minutes we talked about his day instead. One difficult airway. One surgeon who had tried to change the operating schedule at the last second. Normal problems belonging to a world where nobody debated whether your mother had quietly converted a charity favor into a business asset. After we finished, I brought the laptop back out. I'm going into the archive. Ryan started clearing the plates. You want company? No. You sure? Yes. He nodded. Then he stopped. Morgan. What? If you find out you gave them permission, what happens? I tell Elena. We narrow the issue. And, with your parents? I tell them they were right about that part. He studied me. You'd actually do that? I looked at him. That is a rude question. It's a real one. Yes, I'd do it. Okay. And then, I'd still ask why Dad told clients I was joining projects. Also fair. I carried the laptop into my office. Morrow kept archived email for exactly the same reason I kept version numbers. Projects lasted years. People changed firms. Clients forgot what they had approved. Consultants remembered conversations differently after enough time passed. I started with the date on the screenshot. No exact match. Then I widened the search by a week. Dozens of messages. Mom had apparently been especially active that month. Can you send the one with the stone steps? Do you have anything without people in it? Which award do I mention? Is landscape architecture different from landscape design? I smiled despite myself at that last one. I had answered, yes. Nothing else. That was very much who I had been with my family by then. I kept searching. Eventually, I found an email chain with the subject, Westport House Tour Brochure. I opened it. There were 8 messages. Mom asking for photographs. Me asking which project. Mom explaining the charity event. Me sending the press package. Mom asking whether she could use the short bio instead of the long one. Then the message. I read the full sentence. For the Charity House Tour Brochure, use whatever you need from the press folder. I did not move. There it was. Not vague. Not broad. Not difficult. For the Charity House Tour Brochure. The screenshot Carter's attorney had sent Elena began immediately after those words. Use whatever you need from the press folder. They had not altered what I wrote. They had altered what the sentence meant by removing the part that defined it. I scrolled down. Mom had replied 12 minutes later. Perfect. This is exactly what I need for the brochure. Thank you. I leaned back in my chair. For a few seconds I felt relief. Then anger replaced it. Relief would have been easier. If somebody had simply misunderstood an old email, I could have accepted that. Families misremember conversations constantly. People genuinely convinced themselves they were given more permission than they were. But somebody had taken a sentence whose scope was stated in the opening words and presented only the section that sounded unlimited. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. I was no longer willing to assume there was. I saved the full thread in its original format. I exported a review copy. I saved the archive metadata. Then I called Elena, even though it was after 8. She answered, "You found it. How did you know? You only call me this late when you found something or when you're furious." Both. I read her the sentence. She was quiet for a moment. And the screenshot they sent begins after, "For the Charity House Tour Brochure?" Yes. Any reply from Diane? She says it's exactly what she needs for the brochure. Another pause. Send me the full thread. I did. She stayed on the line while the email came through. I heard clicking. Then, okay. That is a very restrained reaction. I'm paid to be restrained. I'm not. I'm aware. What do you think? I think the full thread materially changes the meaning of the excerpt they sent. Meaning someone cropped it. Clearly. Intentionally. Someone intentionally selected part of the email. We do not yet know why. I shut my eyes. You're going to make me say it, aren't you? Say what? That we still don't know who created the screenshot. Correct. I hate you. No, you don't. No, I don't. Anything else in the chain? Mom acknowledged it was for the brochure. Good. Good? Useful. Not emotionally good. I stared at my desk. So what happens now? I send the full thread to Carter's counsel. I ask them to confirm the source of the cropped version and the basis on which it was presented as evidence of broader permission. And if they say Mom did it, we deal with that fact when we have it. If they say nobody knows, we deal with that. If they say it doesn't matter, then they will be wrong. That made me smile. Finally, something satisfying. Elena continued. Do not send this to Ashley tonight. Why? Because you're angry, she's defensive, and nothing improves by having sisters litigate document context over text message. I wasn't going to. You considered it. I considered several things. Sleep. I have work tomorrow. That too. I hung up. Ryan was in bed reading when I came upstairs. He looked over the top of his book. Well? I handed him my phone with the full email open. He read it. Then he looked at the cropped screenshot beside it. That's not the same permission. No, not even close. No. He handed the phone back. Are you relieved? I was for about 30 seconds. And now? Now I want to know who cut it. Ryan set the book down. Do you think it was your mom? I think it came from her original email. That isn't what I asked. I know. I sat on the edge of the bed. I don't want to decide she did it because I'm angry with her. That sounds reasonable. It also feels ridiculous because who else would have the email? Anyone she forwarded it to? Possibly. Your dad? Possibly. Ashley? Possibly. So you don't know? No. He reached for my hand. Then don't know yet. I laughed quietly. That is horrible advice. It's excellent advice. I hate uncertainty. You design gardens. Your entire profession is waiting years to see whether things grow the way you planned. That is completely different. Obviously. I leaned against him. For years, I had told myself I was good at boundaries because I had stopped arguing with my family. That night, I understood something I had not wanted to admit. Sometimes I had not set a boundary at all. I had simply withdrawn. Mom asked for photographs, I sent them. Dad dismissed my work. I stopped explaining it. Ashley made jokes. I made sharper ones back. I called all of that independence because independence sounded better than avoidance. Real boundaries required clarity. They required the mildly uncomfortable act of saying what was allowed before someone crossed the line, not just deciding afterward that they should have known. I had not always done that. That was mine. But my lack of perfect clarity did not give anyone the right to erase the clarity that had existed. For the charity house, tour brochure was not ambiguous. Someone had removed it. The next morning, Elena sent the full thread to Carter Residential Group's attorney. Her email was deliberately boring. She noted that the excerpt previously provided omitted language expressly limiting the use of the press materials to the charity house tour brochure. She attached the complete thread, including Diane's response referencing the brochure, and requested identification of the source of the cropped image. Then she asked one question. Who created the excerpt that was provided to us? No accusation, no speech, no mention of deception, just a question. We waited. By lunchtime, nothing. By 3, nothing. At 4:30, Ashley called. I almost did not answer. Then I did. You found the full email. It was not a question. Yes. You could have called me. Why? Because now, Dad's attorney is asking everyone where the screenshot came from. That seems like a reasonable question. You knew this would turn into another investigation. No. I knew somebody cut the context off an email. Mom says she just pulled the sentence that mattered. I went still. What? Ashley hesitated. I could almost hear her realizing she had said more than she intended. Mom says the part you're making such a big deal about wasn't relevant. For the charity house, tour brochure wasn't relevant to whether I gave permission for something outside the charity house, tour brochure? I didn't say I agree. Did she create the screenshot? I don't know. You just said she pulled the sentence. She said she pulled out the relevant part. I don't know whether she made that exact screenshot or sent it to the lawyer or Dad or whoever. That distinction mattered. I forced myself not to jump past what I knew. Did she explain why she cut off the first part? She said everybody already knew what the email was about. Then why use it to prove permission for something else? Ashley exhaled sharply. This is what talking to you is like. Every answer becomes another trap. No, every answer becomes another question when it doesn't make sense. You're enjoying being right. That stopped me. Do you think I enjoy this? I think you enjoy catching people. I opened my mouth, then closed it, because once again, she had found a piece of me I did not particularly like. I did enjoy being right sometimes. I enjoyed exposing sloppy thinking. I enjoyed when somebody who had dismissed me discovered that I had noticed the detail they hoped I would miss. Those traits had helped build my career. They could also turn cruel if I was not careful. I like clarity, I said. That isn't the same thing. No, it isn't. Ashley waited. I'm trying not to turn this into winning, I said. Well, it sure feels like losing from here. I'm not asking you to lose. You're asking me to choose. No, Dad is. She went silent. I immediately knew I had struck something. What does that mean? I asked. Nothing. Ashley, I have to go. Did Dad ask you to do something? I said I have to go. She ended the call. I stared at the phone. It was too early for me to understand what that hesitation meant. At the time, I assumed she was simply tired of being in the middle. I had not yet realized that being in the middle was the safest place Ashley had ever known in our family, because she had spent her whole life standing on the side our parents rewarded. That would change. For now, I had a narrower problem. Elena called just after 6. Carter's counsel responded. And they are not identifying the creator of the screenshot at this time. That sounds lawyerly. It is. What did they say? That the excerpt was provided as an example of historical permission, and that they are reviewing the context you supplied. Historical permission for a charity brochure. Yes. Did they withdraw the claim that I gave broad permission? Not exactly. Of course not. They said they need to confer with their client. Which client? The company. I understood why she emphasized it. Carter's attorney represented Carter Residential Group. Not my mother personally. Not necessarily my father personally in every future conflict. Not Ashley. The distinctions were beginning to matter. What do we do? For now, nothing dramatic. That phrase is becoming offensive. You hired the wrong lawyer if you wanted dramatic. I know. We have the full thread. We have a clear boundary going forward. We continue identifying where Mara was represented and how. So we wait. We verify. I looked at the original email again. For the charity house tour brochure, use whatever you need from the press folder. That sentence had done something unexpected to me. It had made me less certain for a day. Then it had made me much more careful. Before, I had been tempted to frame the whole story in simple terms. They took my work. I caught them. They lied. I proved it. Real life was Ulyar. I had been careless with small permissions because I did not think my parents mattered enough professionally to deserve my attention. Ashley had accepted vague assurances because asking harder questions might have made her job uncomfortable. Dad had treated access to me as something he could negotiate after he had already sold the possibility. And Mom had taken a sentence tied to one specific charity brochure and stripped away the words that tied it there. I still did not know who created the exact screenshot Carter's attorney sent us. I did not know who first decided that family was enough to turn one brochure permission into an ongoing commercial resource. But I knew one thing with complete certainty. The next time my parents told me this was all a misunderstanding, I was going to ask them to explain why the misunderstanding only worked after someone removed the part of my email that made the truth clear. My mother finally admitted she had pulled the sentence out of the old email herself. Not in writing. Not through a lawyer. She did it over coffee 3 days after Elena sent the full thread to Carter's counsel. And even then, Diane managed to make it sound as though the problem was not what she had done, but the fact that I insisted on describing it accurately. It was the relevant sentence, she said. We were sitting in a quiet corner of a restaurant in Stamford because I had refused to have another conversation at my parents' house. Ryan was working. Ashley had said she was too busy to come. Elena was not at the table, but she knew the meeting was happening and had told me to summarize anything substantive afterward. I looked at my mother. The relevant sentence to what? To whether I had permission. You had permission for a charity brochure. You gave me access to the press folder. For a charity brochure. You keep repeating that. Because you keep removing it. Mom set down her cup. This is exactly why nobody can talk to you anymore. You seize on one phrase and refuse to understand the context. I almost laughed. You removed the context. Her lips tightened. You know what I mean. That sentence had become my mother's favorite defense. You know what I mean. It allowed her to move responsibility out of her words and into my interpretation. If I understood what she meant, then the words no longer mattered. If I did not, then I was difficult. What did you mean when you sent that screenshot to Dad's company? I was showing that you had given me permission. For Carter's commercial proposals? For using your materials. Those are not the same thing. In your world, apparently. I leaned back. My world has contracts. So does your father's. Exactly. Mom looked away. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, You are acting like I forged something. I have never said that. You imply it. No, the email is real. The screenshot is real. What changed was the meaning after you removed the words that limited the use. I didn't change the meaning. Then why remove them? She looked directly at me. Because everyone knew what the email was about. That answer was so circular I almost admired it. If everyone knew it was about the charity brochure, then it could not prove permission for something beyond the charity brochure. She shook her head. You always have to win. There it was again. Maybe she was right about that part. I did like getting to the point where an argument could no longer hide behind vague language. I liked precision. I liked knowing which version of a plan had actually been approved, which boundary had actually been stated, which promise had actually been made. But this did not feel like winning. It felt like discovering my mother had built a door out of my words and then insisted I had opened it for her. "I'm not trying to beat you," I said. "I'm trying to stop my firm from being used as if it belongs to this family." Her expression changed. "It does belong to this family." I stared at her. Mom seemed to realize what she had said, but instead of correcting herself, she leaned into it. "Not legally. Don't start. I mean, you are our daughter. Your father helped raise you. We encouraged you. We drove you to programs. We paid for things when you were young. We supported you. You supported your child. Yes, that doesn't buy future rights in my company. That is not what I said. It is where the argument goes." She looked down at her coffee. A familiar tiredness came over me. I had spent years thinking my mother dismissed my career because she did not understand it. That was easier to forgive. Ignorance could be irritating without being calculated. But she understood enough to know the press mattered. She understood enough to organize my awards. She understood enough to pass my work into Dad's business. And she understood enough to pull the part of an email that made permission look broader than it was. Maybe she genuinely believed none of that was wrong. I was beginning to think that made her more dangerous, not less. Dad arrived 20 minutes late. He did not apologize. He sat down, ordered coffee, and said, "Can we finish this?" "That depends what you mean by finish." "I mean you stop sending letters, we clean up any wording you dislike, and everyone moves on." Mom looked relieved. Apparently this had been discussed before he arrived. I asked, "Do you agree Morrow never had a standing relationship with Carter?" Dad rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You're obsessed with labels. It's a yes or no question." "No, it isn't. It really is." He sighed. "We had access to you." "No. You're my daughter. That describes a family relationship. It also means if I had ever genuinely needed your expertise, I could have called you." "You could have called me." "Exactly. And I could have said no." His expression hardened. "You wouldn't have." I held his gaze. "You never asked." "Because there was no need yet. You told Thomas Avery I usually became involved later. And when the time came, if it made sense, we would have discussed it. I let that sit between us for a moment. You sold the possibility before asking whether I was available. Sold is a dramatic word. It was in a sales conversation. I described resources. You described me. You are a resource." Mom shifted slightly. Dad seemed not to hear what he had just said. "I did. I'm not one of your resources." "Oh, grow up." I almost smiled. That was my father in one sentence. When his assumptions worked, they were family. When I challenged them, I was childish. "You keep acting as if anyone was harmed," he said. "You are qualified. Your firm is legitimate. You're acting as if I put a random teenager's Instagram photos in a proposal and called her an architect. My qualifications are not the issue. They absolutely are. No. If I weren't qualified, your representation would be ridiculous. Because I am qualified, it becomes useful. That still doesn't make it authorized. If they ever needed you, I would have paid you." I stared at him. He said it with complete confidence, as though that solved everything. "You understand what you just admitted?" I admitted nothing. "You were willing to promise access first and figure out whether I agreed later. I said I would have compensated you." "That's not permission." Dad pushed his coffee away. "You have built an entire moral crisis out of how business actually works." "No, I built a company. I know exactly how business works. And yet somehow you think relationships don't matter." "Relationships matter. They are not contracts. Not everything needs to be a contract." "Not everything. My firm's availability does." Mom leaned forward. "What do you want from us?" The question sounded sincere. I answered sincerely. "I want Carter to stop using Morrow's name, my biography, our awards, or language implying access to me unless there is written permission." Dad threw up his hands. "Fine. I want known materials corrected." "Fine. I want no one telling clients I usually join later." "Fine. And I want the people who have already been given that impression to be told clearly that there is no standing affiliation." That was where he stopped. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because I am not sending apology letters to clients over this." I didn't say apology. You know exactly how that looks. Like a correction. Like weakness. That was the real issue. Not law. Not family. Not even money yet. Robert Carter could tolerate changing future behavior. What he hated was admitting that past behavior had required correction. You want me to call Henry Blackwell and tell him we misrepresented our design network? I want him to know Morrow is not part of it. He already knows because you told him. Then correcting the deck should be easy. Dad's face tightened. You are trying to damage that relationship. No, I am asking you to stop using mine. He looked at Mom as though I had proved his point. I left the meeting 40 minutes later with nothing signed and no dramatic breakthrough. But the next step was clearer than it had ever been. We stopped debating what my parents meant. Elena sent the formal correction and non-use notice. It was narrow on purpose. Morrow Landscape Studio had no standing partnership, subcontracting arrangement, or automatic consulting relationship with Carter Residential Group. Carter was not authorized to represent my availability, my firm's availability, or future participation without written confirmation. Identified proposal materials needed to be corrected. Any future reference to Morrow would require specific written consent. We did not blast it across the industry. We did not post it publicly. We did not call trade publications. We sent it only where we had a reason to believe the false impression had already traveled. Dad hated that. He hated it even more when his own attorney advised him that resisting a narrow correction could become harder to explain than simply making one. 3 days later, Carter agreed to remove the disputed language from future materials. I should have felt relieved. Instead, Dad asked me to dinner. Alone. That was unusual enough that I knew it was business before he said it was. We met at a steakhouse he liked in Greenwich, the kind of place where the lighting made everyone look wealthier than they were, and half the room seemed to know my father by name. He waited until we had ordered before sliding a folder across the table. I'm trying to solve this. I did not touch it. What is it? A consulting proposal. For what? For us. I looked at him. He almost smiled. You want formal? Let's make it formal. I opened the folder. It was not insulting. That was what made it more interesting. There was a real retainer. Referral compensation. A proposed fee structure for projects where Morrow actually participated. A provision for separate scope approval. Even a possibility of profit participation on certain integrated projects if both sides agreed in writing. If he had offered it to me 2 years earlier, before using my firm in a single deck, I might have considered it. Maybe not accepted, but considered. Dad watched my face. You're surprised. I'm reading. It solves the whole problem. No, you haven't finished. I don't need to. His jaw tightened. Morgan, it solves the future. That's the point. No, you want it to solve the past too. He was quiet. I flipped another page. There it was. A paragraph in the background section referring to the parties' long-standing informal family collaboration. I tapped it. This. What about it? That didn't exist. Of course it did. No. I sent you questions over the years. You texted me about trees. You gave advice. I answered family questions. You helped. Not as a consultant. This is semantics. It's the entire dispute. Dad leaned forward. So remove that sentence. Then this becomes a future consulting proposal. Fine. And it does nothing about the old decks. We fix the old decks. And the old representations. We address them reasonably. You mean quietly. I mean without burning down a business over language. I closed the folder. You still think I'm doing this to hurt you, aren't you? No. You could make all of this disappear. How? Work with us. There was no shame in his voice. No apology. He sincerely believed he had reached the elegant solution. If the problem was that he had implied we worked together before asking me, then the answer was to make us work together now. Then everyone could look backward and call the earlier situation informal, messe, familial, imprecise, perhaps, but basically true. That was exactly why I could not accept. You're offering me money to turn your previous assumption into a relationship. I'm offering you business. I already have business. Then take more. I don't want more from you. His face changed. There was the insult. Not that I had accused him. Not that I had hired counsel. That I did not need what he was offering. Do you know how many people would kill for access to my client base? Yes, and you're too good for it. That's not what I said. It's what you mean. No, I mean, I don't want to create a partnership because you represented one before it existed. You make everything personal. You called me here because I'm your daughter. That's different. I almost laughed. Of course it is. He sat back. You've always wanted to prove you didn't need us. That sentence was more accurate than most things he had said in weeks. I did, and now I don't need to prove it. He looked at me for a long time. Then he took the folder back. You're making a mistake. Maybe. You think these billionaire clients are loyal? You think architects are loyal? One bad year and they forget your name. That could happen. And then I build again. Dad shook his head as if I were impossibly naive. What he never understood was that risk did not frighten me the way dependence did. I had spent years building a business whose reputation belonged to itself. Taking Dad's offer would not make me safer. It would make the line between us harder to see. I left without the contract. By mid-December, things became quiet. Not repaired. Quiet. Carter removed Morrow references from the version of the Blackwell proposal, still under discussion. Henry's office acknowledged the clarification and said nothing more. A few other known recipients received short corrections. No one called me screaming. No newspaper ran a story. No client accused me of anything. Dad stopped calling. Mom sent a Christmas invitation as though none of this had happened. Ashley sent a message asking whether Ryan and I were coming. We went. That decision confused several people when I later told the story. They assumed that once lawyers appeared, every family dinner must have ended. Real life was less convenient. I was not interested in punishing myself by missing every holiday because my parents had behaved badly. Ryan and I stayed for 2 hours. We brought wine. We did not discuss business. When Dad tried once to make a joke about legal approval before opening a bottle, I looked at him and said, "Don't." He stopped. That was enough. For a few weeks, I started believing the worst part might be over. Morrow had its boundary in writing. Carter had agreed to stop using the disputed language. My parents were furious, but fury was not new. I returned my attention to actual work. We had a project entering construction documentation. Claire was preparing a presentation for a new client. I spent half a day reviewing grading around an old stone terrace and another half day convincing a homeowner that installing 6 mature trees in frozen ground right before Christmas was not the emergency he believed it was. Ryan and I finally started hanging wedding photographs. Normal life returned. Then, in the first week of January, Elena called me while I was at my desk. "I have another one." I put down my pencil. "Another what?" "Carter client." I felt my shoulders tighten. "Like Thomas Avery?" "No. Different client. Different project." That mattered immediately. Thomas had been useful because his email showed a pattern, but his project was finished. He had not threatened legal action or claimed measurable damage. What do they want? They want to know whether Morrow was supposed to be involved in their estate renovation. Who? Daniel and Rebecca Whitmore. The names meant nothing to me. Never heard of them. I assumed. What happened? They received one of the corrections identifying Morrow as having no standing relationship with Carter. I waited. They say the proposal they received nearly 2 years ago placed Morrow under an integrated landscape coordination section. That sounds like Thomas. There's more. I felt a familiar coldness settle in. What? They asked about it before signing. I stood and walked to my office door, then closed it. What were they told? That landscape design would come in during the site and landscape phase. By whom? We're still confirming the chain. They have emails. I stared at the glass wall of my office. When was that phase supposed to happen? That's the interesting part. It never did. Why? The renovation was structured in phases. Phase 1 was house and structural work. It ran long because of permitting and construction changes. Before Phase 2 began, the Whitmores deferred the heavier site and landscape work. For how long? More than a year. That changed the logic immediately. If somebody had told the Whitmores that Morrow would appear during a later landscape phase, they would not necessarily have expected me during the first year of structural work. And if they themselves postponed the phase where I was supposedly going to become involved, My absence would not have looked suspicious yet. Until now. Why did they defer it? According to them, timing, budget, and a family scheduling issue. Nothing dramatic. And the project is still open? Parts of it. They were considering restarting the landscape phase this spring. I sat back down. So they got the correction. And called Morrow. What did you tell them? Nothing substantive without you. Good. Elena. Yes? If they ask whether we were retained, the answer is no. I know. If they ask whether I reviewed plans, no. I know. If they ask whether Dad ever contacted me about their property, also no. I know. She paused. Morgan, I need you not to get ahead of this. I'm not. You sound like you are. I'm sitting at my desk. You can get ahead of things sitting down. That annoyed me because it was accurate. What exactly did their proposal say? I'll send you the relevant pages after we confirm we're permitted to share them. Fine. And they may want to speak with you directly with counsel aware. Fine. Do not tell them what they should do about Carter. I won't. I know. I'm saying it anyway. An hour later, Elena sent me the material the Whitmores had authorized her to share. I opened the proposal. Carter branding. Project overview. Construction phase. Integrated design coordination. Then the section. Morrow Landscape Studio. Not an employee. Not a subcontractor. But positioned alongside other professionals as though we belonged inside the project ecosystem. There was also an email. Rebecca Whitmore had written, "Will Morgan's office remain involved when we get to exterior planning, or would we contract with her separately?" The reply came from Carter. "Landscape coordination will come in during the site phase. We'll handle that internally as the project progresses." Not my father's name on that particular email. A Carter address. I read it twice. Handle that internally. That phrase was designed to calm a client without forcing a precise answer. The Whitmores had deferred the phase. The question had gone dormant. Then my correction arrived, and told them the relationship they had been told Carter would handle internally had never existed. My phone rang. "Elena, they want to speak with you." "When?" "Tomorrow." I met Daniel and Rebecca Whitmore by video the next afternoon, with Elena on the call. They were not furious. Not at first. Rebecca looked more confused than angry. "I'm trying to understand whether there was ever a point when you knew about our project." "No," I said. "Not even early planning?" "No." "You didn't review the exterior concept?" "No." "You weren't waiting for us to restart phase 2? "No." She looked at Daniel. He leaned closer to the camera. "We were told the landscape team would come in later." "I can only speak for Morrow," I said. "Morrow was never retained, and I never committed to participate." Rebecca frowned. "We chose Carter partly because we liked the idea that architecture, construction, and landscape would be coordinated. We looked you up." I did not answer immediately. That was different from Thomas. Thomas remembered an expectation. The Whitmores were describing a factor in their decision. "How significant was Morrow specifically?" Elena asked. Daniel answered, "I wouldn't say we hired Carter only because of Morgan. That would be ridiculous. But it was part of the package they presented." Rebecca nodded. "We thought we were buying an integrated team." I felt anger rise again. Not because they blamed me. They did not. Because I could finally see the shape of what Dad had been selling. He did not need clients to believe Morrow was guaranteed. He needed them to believe access existed. If they never used it, fine. If they asked later, he could call me then. If I said yes, the story became true. If I said no, schedules changed. Another consultant stepped in. Nobody had to notice the original promise had been made before my consent. Until the Whitmores asked at exactly the wrong time. Daniel looked into the camera. "Was your father allowed to put your firm in that proposal?" Elena glanced at me. I answered carefully. "Morrow had no standing agreement with Carter Residential Group at that time. We had not authorized Carter to commit our availability for your project." Rebecca sat back. "That is not what we understood." "I know." There was nothing else useful for me to say. They thanked us and ended the call. I stayed online with Elena. What happens now? That is their decision. You know what they're going to do. I know they're talking to counsel. Is that what you meant by not getting ahead of it? Yes. I rubbed my forehead. I don't want them filing something because they think I'm encouraging it. They won't. How do you know? Because you didn't. That helped. Not much, but enough. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. Then Rebecca sent a short email thanking us for the clarification. Below, it was one sentence. Our attorney will be reviewing the representations made to us before we proceed with the next phase. I stared at it. This was no longer about my wedding. It was no longer about my mother's screenshot. It was not even primarily about whether Dad respected my career. A client had paid Carter Residential Group under a picture of an integrated team that had never actually existed in the form they understood it. And for the first time, someone outside my family was asking what that difference was worth. The Whitmore's attorney sent the demand letter 11 days later. By then, January had settled over Connecticut in the dull gray way it always did after the holidays, when the Christmas lights came down and everything outside looked temporarily unfinished. I was at Morrow reviewing stone samples for a client when Elena called and asked whether I had 10 minutes. That was lawyer language for something had changed. What did they do? They sent Carter a pre-suit demand. I set the sample board aside. How serious? Serious enough that Carter's counsel has issued a document hold. Not a lawsuit yet. What are they asking for? An explanation of what they were told about Morrow, the proposal materials, communications related to the integrated team, and a financial resolution. What kind of financial resolution? They haven't put a final number on it. That sounds ominous. It means they're negotiating. I looked through the glass wall of my office. Claire was at the long work table with 2 designers, arguing over a site plan with enough hand gestures to qualify as choreography. Nobody outside my office knew anything had changed. Are they saying Carter committed fraud? They're saying they relied on representations that may not have been accurate. That is lawyer language too. Yes. What do they want from me? Nothing right now. Then why are you calling? Because Carter wants something from you. I felt my shoulders tighten. What? They want a statement. Of course they did. Elena sent it while we were still on the phone. I opened the attachment. The document was 1 page. No dramatic title. No admission. No accusation. Just a paragraph drafted to sound boring enough that anyone signing it might forget how much it changed. Morrow Landscape Studio has historically maintained an informal, collaborative relationship with Carter Residential Group through shared family resources, professional referrals, and occasional consultation. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Elena said, I assume that's a no. Did they really think I would sign this? They know you might not. Then why send it? Because if you do, it helps them. How much? A lot. I scrolled down. The second paragraph said that any prior references to Morrow in Carter materials should be understood within the context of that informal historical collaboration. There it was. Not an apology. Not a correction. A retroactive explanation. If I signed it, everything my father had been saying for weeks suddenly became easier to defend. There had been no unauthorized implication. There had only been an informal family relationship that everyone had understood differently. What happens if I sign? It gives Carter something useful in the Whitmore dispute. What happens if I don't? They continue negotiating without it. So they don't need me. They need your statement if they want to use that version of events. I leaned back. I never had an informal collaboration with Carter. I know. I answered Dad's questions about trees twice. I know. I gave Mom materials for a charity brochure. I know. I was never retained by Carter. I never agreed to be part of their network. I never committed availability. I know. Then why are we still talking? Because your father would like to make you an offer. I closed my eyes. He already did. This is more specific. How generous. Elena's voice softened slightly. Morgan, I want you to hear it before you react. That sounds dangerous. It's not dangerous. It's business. Fine. They're offering a retrospective consulting payment for what they characterize as informal support, plus a formal future relationship if you want one. Same idea. There's more money. That makes it the same idea with better numbers. They're also willing to compensate Morrow for limited use of historical materials as part of a global resolution. Global. Yes. I hate that word. You hate most useful words. I looked at the statement again. Does signing this mean I'm saying their old proposals were accurate? Not exactly. That is why it exists. It would help them argue that the old language reflected a real informal relationship, which did not exist. Then don't sign it. I stared at the page. That should have been easy. It was not. Not because I wanted the money. The offer was substantial enough to deserve attention. But Morrow was not in trouble. I was not choosing between integrity and payroll. What made it difficult was the fact that signing could reduce the damage. Carter had around 40 employees. Project managers, estimators, site supervisors, office staff, people who had nothing to do with my mother's folder or my father's sales language. If the Whitmore dispute expanded, legal costs alone could become painful. Dad knew that. Mom knew it better. And apparently they had decided I needed to know it too. I told Elena I would not sign anything that day. Good. You expected me to say no. I expected you to think before saying no. That is very different. It is. I closed the document. Can I respond that I will confirm anything that is actually true? Yes. I can say I've answered occasional personal questions for Robert over the years. Yes. I can say Morrow has received referrals from all kinds of people, including family. If true, it is. But not a standing collaboration. No. Then that's the position. I felt something in me settle. I'll confirm facts. I won't manufacture a relationship. That's the sentence. I smiled. Do lawyers get paid extra every time they say something painfully reasonable? No, that's included. The next call came from my father. He waited until that evening. I was at home with Ryan when my phone lit up with Dad's name. Ryan glanced at me from the kitchen. You want backup? No. You want me to leave? No. You want me to pretend I can't hear? Perfect. I answered. Dad skipped hello. You got the statement. Yes. You understand why we need it. You want me to say something existed when it didn't. That is not what it says. It says we had an informal collaborative relationship. We did. No? Morgan. Dad. He exhaled hard. Why do you have to make everything adversarial? I'm not the one asking you to sign a false statement. False according to you. Who else would know whether my firm collaborated with yours? You are obsessed with technical definitions. I'm obsessed with not signing things that aren't true. You advised me over the years. Personally, you gave us material for a charity brochure. You took referrals. I take referrals from architects, clients, neighbors, former classmates, and occasionally people I meet standing in line for coffee. That doesn't make them business partners. He went quiet. Then his voice changed. Less angry. More controlled. That was when I knew the real pitch was starting. I'm trying to protect my company. I know. There are people who depend on me. I know. This is not just about me. I know. You keep saying that. Because I do know. Then act like it. I stared across the room at Ryan, who was cutting vegetables and doing a very poor job of pretending not to listen. What does acting like it mean? One signature. There it is. Don't be dramatic. You just reduced 40 employees to leverage for one signature. I didn't do that. You called me to tell me people depend on you immediately before asking me to sign something untrue. It is not untrue. Then you don't need me. That stopped him. I continued. If this informal collaboration really existed, prove it without my signature. You know how this looks. Yes. Do you? His tone sharpened again. A client claims they thought they were getting services they did not receive. Your little crusade makes that claim look worse. My correction told them the truth. They were not complaining before you contacted them. I didn't contact them to create a complaint. They received a correction because your company gave them material using my firm. You opened the door. No. The proposal opened the door. The correction just turned on the light. Ryan looked down, probably to hide a smile. Dad did not appreciate the metaphor. You think this is funny? No. Then stop acting clever. I'm not. You always have. There it was again. The old accusation. Too smart. Too precise. Too difficult. My family had a remarkable talent for making competence sound like a personality disorder whenever it became inconvenient. I'm going to tell Elena I will confirm any factual work I actually did, I said. I will not sign a statement saying there was a historical collaboration. Even if refusing costs people their jobs, I felt that one. He knew I would. That was why he used it. But feeling guilt and accepting responsibility were not the same thing. Are you planning layoffs? No. Then don't make me responsible for hypothetical layoffs you're introducing to pressure me. You are unbelievable. Maybe. You could fix this. No. I could help you describe it differently. He hung up. Mom called less than 20 minutes later. I did not answer the first time. She called again. I answered the second. You upset your father. I'm shocked. This is serious, Morgan. I know. No, I don't think you do. She began listing people, not abstract employees. Names. A project coordinator whose husband had been sick. An estimator with 3 children. A site supervisor who had worked for Dad for 15 years. A woman in accounting who had recently bought a house. Mom had always been good at humanizing pressure. It was one of her talents. Those people did nothing to you, she said. I know. They shouldn't suffer because you and your father are stubborn. I agree. Then sign the clarification. It isn't a clarification. It is 1 paragraph. It changes what happened. You are making this about wording again. Yes. 40 people have mortgages. I closed my eyes. There was no version of me that could hear that and feel nothing. I knew what payroll meant. I knew what it meant to have employees who trusted you to make decisions that kept the lights on. Mara was smaller, but every person who worked for me had a rent payment, a family, a plan for the future. Leadership meant understanding that your mistakes did not land only on you. That did not mean I could sign someone else's lie to reduce their consequences. Mom, I am not calling Carter clients and telling them to leave. You started this. I sent corrections about my firm. You brought lawyers in. After Dad used my firm in proposals. You're going to keep going in circles. Because you keep trying to start the story after the thing you did. She went silent. That sentence landed harder than I intended. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. You've always resented that company. No. You resented Ashley working there. That's not true. You thought you were better than it. Sometimes I thought I was better than the way Dad ran things. Exactly. That isn't the same as wanting 40 people unemployed. But you're willing to risk it. I stared down at my free hand. There was a difference between cruelty and refusing to absorb somebody else's liability. I needed to remember it. I'm willing to let Carter deal with the consequences of Carter's representations, I said. I am not willing to create new ones. Mom made a sound halfway between anger and disbelief. You really think that sentence makes you moral? No. Then what does? I'm not trying to be moral, I'm trying to be accurate. She hung up too. I stood in the kitchen for a moment after the call ended. Ryan put down the knife. You okay? No. Want me to tell you they're manipulating you? They are. Want me to tell you not to feel guilty? That would be useless. He nodded. Good. I wasn't going to. I looked at him. That is why I married you. I assumed it was the anesthesiology. Mom does think that's the real career. He laughed. The tension broke just enough. I told him about the employees Mom had named. He listened. Then he said, if one of your employees lied to a client and it cost Morrow money, who would be responsible? I would. Even if you personally didn't write the email? If it happened through my company, yes. So why are you assigning yourself more responsibility for Carter's employees than Robert is? I did not answer immediately. That was a better question than I wanted it to be. I'm not. You are a little. Probably. Then stop. I'm trying. That's all. The pre-suit negotiations lasted several more weeks. I was not in the room for most of them, and I did not pretend otherwise when I told this story later. Elena gave me updates only where Morrow was relevant. Carter's counsel spoke for the company. The Whitmores had their own attorney. Nobody dragged me into every exchange. What I knew was simple. The Whitmores wanted a meaningful resolution for what they believed had been presented to them. Carter wanted the matter framed as an unfortunate misunderstanding about an informal family design relationship. The problem was that the person whose firm supposedly made that relationship real would not sign the sentence. Me. By the end of January, the talks stalled. Then Client B filed a civil complaint against Carter Residential Group. There was no courtroom showdown. No sheriff at my parents' door. No dramatic freezing of bank accounts. A complaint was filed. Attorneys entered appearances. Preservation obligations became more formal. The existence of the dispute became something Carter had to manage rather than something Dad could describe away over dinner. Elena explained that the parties were already discussing an efficient path. Targeted early discovery, she said. Then private mediation if they can. Translation. They exchange a limited set of records relevant to the representation issue instead of spending months fighting over everything. Why would Carter agree? Cost, time, privacy. Same reasons rational people settle most things. Dad isn't feeling rational. His lawyer probably is. I smiled. When? They're talking about mediation in April. That gave the conflict something it had not had before. A clock. Not a fake countdown where everything would end on one dramatic date, but a real point by which both sides wanted enough information to judge risk. I did not know yet what that information would include. What I did know was that Dad had once bragged every major proposal went through a controlled approval process. Versions. Comment. Approvals. At the time, I had simply filed the information away. Now a civil case existed in which those records might matter. Dad apparently understood the same thing. Because the next person he pressured was not me. It was Ashley. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon in early February. I nearly did not answer, because I was standing over a planting plan with Claire. Then I saw she had called twice. I stepped into my office. What happened? Her first words were, "Did Dad tell you this was my fault?" I closed the door. No. Silence. Ashley? He's going to. What happened? I got an email from him and company counsel about the complaint. What did it say? That business development owns proposal production. I waited. That's true, isn't it? Yes. What else? That final wording decisions within our department were my responsibility. I felt something shift. Were they? Some of them? That isn't what I asked. I know. Her voice sounded different from every other conversation we had had since the wedding. Not defensive. Scared. What exactly are they asking you to do? Nothing yet. That does not sound like nothing. They want me to put together a timeline of how the decks were created. That sounds normal. And explain which wording decisions I made without Robert's direct involvement. There it was. I sat down. Did you make some wording decisions without him? Yes. Did you decide to use Morrow without him? No. Did you decide the family network language without him? A pause. I don't remember every revision. That is different from no. I know. I took a breath. Do you have your own lawyer? She went quiet. Ashley. No. You may need one. Are you trying to scare me? No. Dad said company counsel represents the company. That is not the same as representing you personally if the company's position becomes that you acted on your own. Another silence. I could almost hear the floor shifting under her. You've been talking to Elena too much. About my own issue, yes. I hate this. I know. You wanted this. No. Don't. I didn't want Dad to blame you. You wanted him exposed. I wanted him to stop using my firm. Same thing now. No. She breathed out. They're saying business development drafted the decks. Did it? Yes. They're saying Dad didn't review every word. He didn't. That is also probably true. Why are you defending him? I'm not. I'm trying to figure out which part of what they're saying is false. Her voice cracked slightly. That was the first time I heard how frightened she really was. They're going to say I did this without his approval. I thought about the brunch the morning after my wedding. Dad leaning back in that hotel seating area, offended that I questioned his controls. We don't throw random PowerPoints at clients. Business development prepares them. Dad approves major submissions. The platform tracks versions and comments. At the time, every sentence had been meant to establish authority. Now, those same sentences sounded very different. Was the Blackwell proposal a major submission? I asked. Yes. The Whitmore proposal? Yes. Would Dad have approved them? He was supposed to. Was it tracked? Yes. Ashley went quiet. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "Oh my God." What? I know what you're thinking. I'm not asking you to send me anything. I didn't say you were. Do not take files for me. I know. Do not forward confidential company records to my email because you're scared. I know. If there are approval records, tell your own lawyer they exist. I don't have one. Then get one. You sound like Elena. That is not a compliment I expected today. Ashley made a small, humorless laugh. It disappeared quickly. Dad told me family means owning your department. I frowned. When? This morning. I did not imagine the scene. I did not pretend I knew Dad's face or Mom's tone or what room they were in. I only knew the words because Ashley told me. What did you say? Nothing. Why? Because I didn't know what he was asking me to own yet. That was smarter than I expected. I almost said so. Then I stopped myself. Ashley was not a child waiting for my approval either. Find out before you sign anything, I said. You think I'm stupid. I think you trusted them. That's worse. No, it's different. She was quiet. Then she asked, do you think Mom lied to me? I thought about the cropped email, about Diane saying the missing words were irrelevant, about the folder on her laptop, about how badly I wanted to give Ashley a simple answer. I think Mom gave you a version of permission that was easier for you to accept. That wasn't my question. No. So answer it. I don't know everything she told you. Ashley breathed out. You always do that. Do what? Refuse to say more than you can prove. I almost laughed. You used to hate that. I still do. Good. Another small laugh. Then silence. Ashley? Yeah. If Dad tells you to take responsibility for things you actually did, do it. I know. If he asks you to take responsibility for things he approved, don't lie. You really know how to make sisterly support sound like a compliance seminar. I'm trying. I know. That was the softest thing she had said to me in months. Then her voice hardened again. They're going to say I did this without Dad's approval. I looked at the closed office door. Beyond it, my staff were working. My clients were waiting on drawings. My husband would be home that evening. My life still existed outside this mess, and I intended to keep it that way. But one fact from the morning after my wedding had just become impossible to ignore. My father had bragged that no major proposal left Carter Residential Group without his approval. Now that a client had filed suit, he needed the same proposals to belong to everyone except him. And somewhere inside the system he had once been so proud of were the records that would show which version was true. Ashley hired her own lawyer 3 days after our phone call. She did not tell me immediately. I found out when she texted asking whether I could meet her somewhere that was not my office, her office, or our parents' house. We settled on a quiet cafe in Norwalk on a Saturday morning, the kind of place where nobody cared if 2 women occupied a corner table for an hour, as long as they kept buying coffee. I arrived first. Ashley came in 5 minutes late wearing jeans, a wool coat, and no makeup beyond mascara. For my sister, that counted as evidence of distress. She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her coffee. I got a lawyer. Good. You don't have to sound pleased. I'm pleased you have someone whose only job is protecting your interests. That sounded exactly like Elena. I warned you. Ashley looked toward the window. For most of our lives, she had been the one who belonged naturally in Dad's world. She joined Carter Residential Group after college, moved through sales and business development, learned which clients liked golf and which hated small talk, and became very good at making a complicated construction company feel simple to people writing very large checks. I had dismissed some of that over the years because Dad had opened the door for her. That had been unfair. The door had been opened. Ashley had still learned how to walk through it. The fact that she had earned some of her success did not erase the way our parents favored her, and the favoritism did not erase the work she had done. Both things could be true. I was getting tired of learning that lesson, but apparently life had decided repetition was necessary. What did your lawyer say? I asked. That company counsel represents Carter Residential Group. Yes. Not necessarily me. Yes. I already knew that because you told me. Then why are you annoyed? Because I hate when you're right. That is a long-standing family tradition. She almost smiled. Then it disappeared. She told me not to sign anything about how the proposals were created until she reviews it. That sounds sensible. She also told me I need to be completely honest about what I did. That sounds even more sensible. Ashley looked at me sharply. You don't get to sit there looking superior. I'm not. You are a little. I considered denying it. Then I decided not to. Probably. She blinked. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Admitting the annoying part before I can use it against you. That is not why I'm admitting it. Sure. I let that go. What did you do, Ashley? She looked down at her coffee. That was the first time she had actually answered the question without hiding behind Dad, Mom, or the department. I knew we used your work. I know. I knew some of the decks made the connection sound stronger than it really was. That was new. How much stronger? She rubbed one thumb against the cardboard sleeve. Not like you were an employee. Nobody ever wrote that. I know. But we wanted clients to understand that Carter wasn't just a builder. Dad wanted us positioned as a firm that could bring in a whole network. And Morrow helped sell that. Yes. The word was quiet. I waited. Ashley continued. Luxury clients want teams. They don't want to hear that you'll figure out landscapes 6 months later. They want to believe the architect, interiors, construction, landscape, lighting, all of it can work together. That part is true. I know. What isn't true is that Carter had automatic access to Morrow. She closed her eyes briefly. I know that now. Didn't you know it then? That's more complicated. No, it's uncomfortable. That's different. Her eyes opened. There, that is exactly what I mean. What? You talk like everything can be reduced to the exact right sentence. It helps. It makes people want to throw things at you. Also fair. She looked away again. I knew you didn't work for Carter. Obviously. I knew we didn't have a contract with Morrow. But Mom kept saying you'd given her permission to use your materials, and Dad kept talking like if we ever needed you, he could call you. Did you believe him? I believed he could call you. That's not the same as believing I'd say yes. I didn't think about the second half. That was the most honest answer she could have given me. Not that she had been fooled. Not that she was innocent. She had simply stopped her thinking at the point where continuing would have made her uncomfortable. You didn't want to think about it, I said. No. Because? Because it worked. I held her gaze. She swallowed. The decks looked better with your work. Clients recognized some of the projects. Your awards helped. It made the family business story feel bigger. And you wanted Mom's permission story to be enough. Yes. There was no fight in the answer. I felt something strange then. Not forgiveness. Not satisfaction. Recognition. Ashley had spent weeks accusing me of turning a wedding insult into a business war. I had spent weeks seeing her as the daughter who accepted whatever version of reality our parents handed her because it benefited her. We had both been partly right. You should have asked me, I said. I know. You should have asked for the full email when Mom showed you the screenshot. I know. You should have pushed back when the wording got stronger. I know. She looked up. Are you going to keep going? No. Because I can. I know you can. I'm not asking you to say it didn't matter. It mattered. Good. We sat quietly for a few seconds. Then Ashley said, I'm sorry. She did not cry. Neither did I. It was not that kind of moment. I believe you, I said. Her shoulders loosened slightly. Then I added, that isn't the same as trusting you yet. The relief disappeared. I figured there'd be a second sentence. There needed to be. I'm trying to help. I know. You still think I'm part of what happened. You are. Her jaw tightened. That's harsh. It's accurate. See, that word again? I'm not going to tell you that Mom manipulated you so completely that you had no choices. You had choices. You made the easy ones. She stared at me. Then she nodded once. I know. That was enough. Ashley took a drink of coffee and said, there's something else. What? My lawyer asked me whether Dad personally approved the big proposals. I felt my attention sharpen. What did you tell her? The truth. Major submissions went through the shared system. The same one you mentioned after the wedding. Yes. With comments and version history. Yes. Did Dad approve the Blackwell proposal? He should have. That wasn't my question. I haven't checked. Good. She looked surprised. You don't want me to check? I want you to do whatever your lawyer tells you is appropriate. I do not want you logging into Carter and emailing me internal files. I wasn't planning to. You called me terrified last week. That doesn't mean I lost my mind. I'm making sure. Ashley leaned back. You really think I'd steal records from Dad for you? I think scared people do things they regret. Do you want the records or not? If they're relevant, I want them preserved and handled through the process that already exists. She stared at me for a second. You could make this easier. So could Dad. No, I mean for yourself. You could ask me to send you everything I know. And then what? You become my informant? That sounds dramatic. It sounds accurate. She gave me a look. I smiled slightly. Sorry. No, you're not. Not entirely. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen and turned it over. My lawyer said the same thing, by the way. What? Don't start forwarding things around. Tell her what exists. Let her deal with company counsel. Your lawyer is excellent. You don't know her. I already like her. Ashley rolled her eyes. I thought that was the end of the issue until she said, Dad and Mom asked me to come over Thursday. I waited. She noticed. You're not going to ask what happened? You'll tell me if you want me to know. That is annoyingly healthy. I'm experimenting. She rubbed her forehead. They said I needed to own my department. The exact phrase she had mentioned during our last call. What did that mean? Dad said business development drafted the language. He said he couldn't personally review every word in every deck. Both statements can be true. I know. Did he say you acted without approval? Not directly. What did he say? Ashley hesitated. I could see her deciding how much to tell me. He said leadership means taking responsibility for the work under you. That is also true. I know. But then Mom said Dad could not be expected to remember every revision we made 2 years ago. I said nothing. Ashley continued. She said the cleanest thing would be for me to explain that business development sometimes adjusted positioning language without involving him in every edit. Did that happen? Yes. On the Mara language? Sometimes. Did Dad know Mara was being used generally? Yes. Did he approve some of the decks? I believe so. Then those are separate facts. Ashley laughed without humor. I know. My lawyer said that too. Everyone is ruining your life with precise distinctions. Apparently. What did you tell them? Nothing useful. What does that mean? I told them I wasn't signing a statement until my lawyer saw it. I nodded. Dad would hate that. Not because hiring counsel was disloyal in itself. Because Ashley had always been the daughter who solved problems inside the family before outsiders saw them. I had been the daughter who left. She had been the daughter who stayed. That difference had protected her for years. Now it was disappearing. Mom said you put this in my head, Ashley said. I almost responded automatically. Then I stopped. I wasn't there. I know. So all I know is what you're telling me. That's weirdly formal. It matters. She looked at me for a second. I'm telling you, she said you'd turned me against the family. Did it work? What? Did hearing that make you think I had? Ashley stared into her coffee. No. Why? Because nobody needed you to point out what they were asking me to do. There it was. Not reconciliation. Something more useful. Independent recognition. Ashley had reached the conclusion without me dragging her there. I did not need to sell it. We left the cafe after almost 90 minutes. Outside, the air was cold enough that both of us pulled our coats closed immediately. Ashley stopped beside her car. What happens if the records show Dad approved everything? I don't know. That's not true. It is. You've thought about it. Of course I've thought about it. So what do you want? That question again. Everyone kept asking me what I wanted, as though the answer had to become larger every time I gained leverage. Money. A confession. The company. Public humiliation. I wanted exactly what I had wanted before. My name out of anything I didn't approve. That's it? Yes. You don't want Dad punished? I want Dad to deal with whatever consequences come from what Dad actually did. That sounds like punishment with better branding. Maybe. Ashley opened her car door. You're impossible. I've heard. This time she smiled. 2 weeks passed before I heard anything useful. The Whitmore case moved slowly enough to be believable and quickly enough to keep everyone uncomfortable. There were lawyers coordinating what categories of records needed to be preserved and exchanged before the April mediation. I was not entitled to roam through Carter's files, and I did not. Elena received updates only where Morrow's status was directly relevant, especially because Carter was still trying to get me to sign some version of the historical relationship statement. Ashley's own attorney handled her interests separately. That distinction became increasingly important. Then Elena called me one Monday morning. "I have something you should see." My pulse jumped. From Carter? Produced in the Whitmore matter. Limited distribution under the confidentiality agreement. What is it? An approval record. I stood and closed my office door. Blackwell? No, Whitmore. That made more sense. Client B's own proposal would be the first target. Elena sent me the excerpt. It was not dramatic looking. No secret memo. No handwritten confession. Just a record from the shared proposal system. A date. A projet identifié. A comment thread. Ashley's name appeared first. "Do you want Morgan included again?" I stopped breathing for half a second. Again. That word mattered. Then Robert's reply. "Absolutely. Her work gets attention." I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. There was no ambiguity about who was speaking. Dad. There was no ambiguity about whether he knew Morrow was in the proposal. He did. There was no suggestion business development had slipped my work past him. He wanted it there because it helped sell. I called Elena. He approved it. He approved keeping you in that proposal. And he said why. Yes. Her work gets attention. Yes. I sat down. The strange thing was that I did not feel victorious. For weeks I had wanted proof that Dad knew. Now I had it. And the proof did not make me feel smarter. It made me feel tired. My father had spent years telling me not to take myself so seriously. He had called my work gardening. He had laughed at the vocabulary I used. He had treated design awards like decorative trophies. But when clients were looking at a multi-million-dollar contract, apparently my work got attention. He had known exactly when my name had value. The problem was not that he failed to understand it. The problem was that he thought understanding its value gave him the right to use it. I called Ashley after speaking to Elena. She answered quietly. "You saw it." "Yes. I didn't send it to you." "I know. My attorney told company counsel it existed. It went through the discovery process." "I know. I need you to know that." "I do." She breathed out. "Dad's furious." I did not ask her to describe the scene. "What is he saying?" "That the comment only proves he approved, including a family reference, not every sentence in the deck." "That may be true." Ashley went silent. "You're defending him again." "No. I'm refusing to make the evidence say more than it says." "Well, that's irritatingly consistent. It says something important." "I know. He knew Morrow was there." "Yes. He wanted it there because it helped sales." "Yes. That means blaming the entire use on you doesn't work." Her voice became smaller. "I know." I waited. "Ashley, it also doesn't make you innocent. I knew that was coming. You drafted things." "Yes." "You accepted Mom's permission story without checking." "Yes." "You let wording get warmer than reality." "Yes." "So this document changes Dad's responsibility. It doesn't erase yours." She was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, "I know." I believed her. That was new. Not trust, but movement. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on the Whitmores, Carter, and the lawyers. I mean with us." I looked through the glass wall of my office. Claire was pinning sketches to a review board while one of our junior designers argued about a tree species. The ordinary sight calmed me. "I don't know." Ashley gave a dry laugh. "You really hate promising things before you know whether you can deliver them." "Yes. Wonder where that came from." That made me smile. Coffee was a start. "So there's another one?" "Maybe." "Wow." Glowing endorsement. "We're not skipping 10 years of damage because Dad disappointed you." The words were harsher than my tone. Ashley accepted them. "I know." Then she said, "There's another email." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What email?" "One I wrote to Mom." "When?" "A while ago. Before one of the bigger proposal rounds." "What did you ask her?" Ashley hesitated. "I asked whether you actually knew we were using your work." I sat completely still. What did she say? My lawyer told me not to start paraphrasing documents that are being reviewed. That was probably the smartest sentence Ashley had spoken in this entire mess. Then don't. You're not going to push me? No. She answered me, Morgan. I assumed she did. And my lawyer flagged the thread for production. I looked at the approval record still open on my screen. Dad's sentence had answered one question. He had known. Now another question was moving toward us. What had Mom told Ashley when someone inside Carter finally asked whether I knew too? Ashley lowered her voice. When you read it, remember something. What? I believed her. The call ended a minute later. I did not know yet what Diane's email said. I only knew Ashley was afraid of me seeing it. And after everything we had already found, that frightened me more than if she had simply said our mother lied. The email Ashley had warned me about arrived through Elena 3 days later. By then, I had learned not to expect important evidence to look important. The things that changed this case rarely arrived with dramatic subject lines or red circles around the truth. They looked like ordinary business records, old messages, comments buried inside software people used every day. This one was no different. Ashley had written to Mom almost 18 months earlier. Does Morgan actually know we're using this? That was the whole question. Mom's reply was 2 sentences. She gave me permission years ago. Don't stir this up. Attached beneath it was the same cropped screenshot Carter's counsel had sent us weeks earlier. Use whatever you need from the press folder. I stared at the screen. I had already known Mom created, or at least selected, the cropped excerpt. She had practically admitted that when she told me she had pulled the relevant sentence. But seeing the screenshot attached to an old email changed the chronology. This had not been something she assembled after the wedding, because lawyers started asking questions. She had used it before. Ashley had asked the right question. Mom had answered it with a version of my permission that removed the exact words defining what I had permitted. For the charity house tour brochure. Gone. I called Elena. So this predates the dispute. Yes. A lot. Yes. And Ashley asked whether I actually knew. Yes. And Mom sent her that. Yes. I rubbed my forehead. Can she still say she misunderstood? She can say anything she wants. The question is how persuasive it becomes when the full email is placed beside this one. That is lawyer language for not very. It is lawyer language for the record is getting more difficult for Carter. I looked back at Mom's sentence. Don't stir this up. Those 4 words bothered me almost more than the screenshot. If Mom genuinely believed I had broadly approved the use, why would Ashley asking a basic permission question count as stirring something up? Maybe Mom meant Ashley was overcomplicating a harmless family arrangement. That was possible. I was done granting every possible explanation the same weight. What happens with this? I asked. It becomes part of the mediation package, relevant to permission and state of knowledge. And Mom? Your mother is not the defendant in the same way the company is. Don't blur roles. I know. Do you? Yes. Good. Elena paused. You should also prepare yourself for Ashley. Why? Because this email makes her look better in one respect and worse in another. I knew immediately what she meant. Ashley had asked. That mattered. She had recognized enough uncertainty to wonder whether I actually knew. But she had also accepted the answer. She saw a cropped sentence with no context and allowed it to become good enough. I called her that evening. She answered quietly. You saw it. Yes. I told you I believed her. You did. I did ask. You did. She was waiting for absolution. I could hear it, even though she did not ask for it directly. I should have asked you, she said. Yes. I should have asked for the full thread. Yes. I thought Mom wouldn't lie to me about something that specific. I looked at the original full email on my screen. I don't know what word Mom uses for what she did. That's not an answer. No. The answer is she gave you an incomplete piece of evidence and told you not to ask further questions. Ashley went quiet. I feel stupid. You weren't stupid. That sounds nicer than I expected. You were convenient. What? You accepted the answer because it let you keep doing something that benefited you. That sounds more like you. It's also what I did with Mom for years in the other direction. She asked for materials, and I sent them because it was easier than having a conversation about limits. That's not the same thing. No. But it came from the same weakness. What weakness? Choosing the answer that costs less in the moment. Ashley said nothing for several seconds. Then, I'm sorry. I know. No, I mean it. I believe you. Her breath eased. Then I said, that still isn't the same as trusting you. I knew that was coming. It needs to. I know. We did not fix our relationship that night. I did not want to. Trust rebuilt too quickly is usually just another form of pretending. What changed was smaller. Ashley stopped asking me to erase her responsibility, simply because our parents' responsibility was becoming larger. A week later, Elena called while I was reviewing a construction set. This time, she did not bother with small talk. We have the version history. I closed the file in front of me. Which proposal? The Whitmore package. Robert's comments? At least one. My stomach tightened. She sent me the produced excerpt. The first version was simple. Under external design resources, Morrow Landscape Studio Independent Landscape Architect. That was accurate. Not perfect, because Morrow had still never agreed to participate, but at least the relationship itself was described honestly. Independent. Then came Dad's comment. Too separate. Make it feel integrated. I read it again. There are sentences that look harmless until you know what happened afterward. This was one of them. The next version removed independent landscape architect. In its place, landscape expertise available through our family design network. There was no need to infer what Dad wanted. The file itself showed the progression. Truthful distance. Dad objected. Closer implied relationship. Approved. I called Elena. He saw the independent wording. Yes. And asked them to make it less separate. Yes. Then he cannot say he thought the final language just meant referral. He can argue what he intended by integrated. Come on. I didn't say it was a strong argument. That almost made me smile. I walked to the window. Outside, the trees behind our building were still mostly bare, but a few branches had started showing the first signs of spring. For months, Dad had treated the entire dispute as a battle over semantics. Now, the semantics had a history. Someone had written the accurate version. Dad had looked at it. Dad had decided accuracy did not sell the relationship strongly enough. He had asked for something closer. That did not prove every conversation Carter ever had with every client. It did not prove every employee understood the language the same way. But it destroyed one story completely. This was not just business development getting carried away, while Robert remained unaware. He had participated. How bad is this for them? I asked. It makes the position that Ashley independently created the family network concept much harder to sustain. And the Whitmores? Their leverage improves. Are they going to trial? Slow down. I'm asking. Everyone still has reasons to settle. Litigation is expensive. The Whitmores don't want to spend 2 years fighting if they can get a meaningful resolution. Carter doesn't want Discovery expanding. Mediation is still scheduled. What about Henry? Separate matter. His side has informed Carter they are no longer moving forward with the renovation negotiation. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not a billionaire throwing a tantrum. Not revenge. A prospective client had looked at a contractor whose sales materials had created confusion about an important design relationship and decided he did not want to proceed. What did Dad say? I don't know. I represent you, not him. Right. And Morgan? Yes? This is where people make mistakes. What kind? The kind where having stronger evidence makes them decide the original objective wasn't ambitious enough. I knew exactly what she meant. The Blackwell project was gone. The Whitmore claim had strengthened. We had Mom's cropped permission. We had Dad's approval. Now we had his revision comment. For the first time since the wedding, I had enough leverage that I could realistically consider doing more. Trade publications would care. Other clients might care. Architects who referred work to Carter would definitely care. I could start calling. I could start asking who else had seen the language. I could make the story bigger. That possibility felt good for about 30 seconds. Then it felt exhausting. What can Morrow still pursue directly? I asked. There are possible claims and remedies we could evaluate. That wasn't what I asked. Elena laughed quietly. You've been around me too long. What do we need to protect the firm? Written correction to known recipients. Clear acknowledgement there was no standing affiliation. Permanent non-use without written authorization. Preservation of the relevant record. We can also negotiate reimbursement of reasonable direct costs related to cleaning this up. And if I want to go after more, we discuss it. I don't. You're sure? Yes. She waited. Why? Because I don't want destroying Carter Residential Group to become my second job. That is a good reason. I also don't want Dad saying I took one legitimate correction and turned it into a campaign to wipe him out. He may say that regardless. I know, but I'll know the difference. I looked at the comment again. Too separate. Make it feel integrated. Dad had made his choice. I did not need to improve the punishment. I only needed to stop protecting him from the consequences. Ashley made her own choice 2 days later. I learned about it from her, not from some scene I had not witnessed. She called after meeting with her lawyer and company counsel. I told them I'm not signing the statement. What statement? The one saying Dad did not know the relationship language was being used. I sat back. What exactly did you tell them? That business development drafted the materials. I approved wording. I relied on Mom's permission claim. Dad did not review every sentence. But I will not say he didn't know Morrow was included, or that he never directed how it was positioned. That sounds accurate. I thought you'd say that. What happened? Ashley laughed once, bitterly. Dad called me ungrateful. I said nothing. Mom said you turned me against them. Still nothing. You can say it. Say what? That you told me so. I didn't. You thought it. Of course I thought it. She almost laughed. Then her voice softened. The weird part is I finally understood something. What? When you left the company years ago, Mom always said you couldn't handle being part of a family business because you needed everything on your terms. I remember. She said almost the same thing to me today. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed Ashley to validate me, because she had finally seen the mechanism from the inside. They don't hate us, I said. I know. They just confuse loyalty with making their problems easier. Ashley was silent. Then she asked, "Do you think they'll forgive me?" I looked at the phone. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know." "Then don't make your next decision around the answer." Another pause. "You really did become Elena." Terrifying. This time she laughed. The mediation was scheduled for the last week of April. By then, the basic evidence was no longer seriously disputed. The fight had shifted to what the evidence meant and what resolving it would cost. The Whitmores wanted a fee adjustment, contribution towards some of their legal expenses, and written assurances about how the design relationship had been represented. Carter wanted confidentiality, no admission broader than necessary, and an end to the dispute. Morrow was not a plaintiff in the same posture, but my firm's name sat at the center of the relationship they were trying to explain. Robert still wanted me to sign a version of the historical collaboration statement. I still refused. 2 days before mediation, Dad asked for one direct meeting. Elena agreed as long as counsel attended and the subject stayed within settlement. When I walked into the conference room, Dad was already there. Mom sat beside him. Ashley had her own lawyer at the other end of the table. That alone told me how much had changed. 6 months earlier, Dad had mocked my profession at my wedding while Ashley worked inside his company and Mom managed the family story. Now 3 separate lawyers sat around a table because nobody trusted one family version of events anymore. Dad looked tired. Not defeated. Tired. He waited until everyone sat down. Then he pushed a sheet of paper toward me. "Tell me what you want." I looked at the page, then at him. For months, he had assumed I was building toward something larger. Money. Clients. A piece of Carter Residential Group. Revenge. I opened my folder and placed my own list on the table. Dad read it once. His eyebrows drew together. He read it again. Then he looked at me. "That's it?" And in that moment I understood he still had not figured out what this had been about from the beginning. My list had 5 items. Written correction to the clients who had received materials suggesting Morrow had a standing relationship with Carter Residential Group. A clear acknowledgement that no such standing relationship had existed. No future use of my firm's name, biography, awards, or availability without written permission. preservation of the records already identified, and reimbursement of the direct professional costs Morrow had incurred cleaning up a problem we had not created. That was it. Dad read the page a third time. You don't want damages? Elena and I have already separated Morrow's costs from the Whitmore dispute. You don't want a percentage of future business? No. You don't want equity? No. You don't want access to the Blackwell account? Henry already ended the negotiation with Carter. His mouth tightened. That wasn't my question. I don't want his account either. Dad leaned back in his chair as if I had denied him the ending he had prepared for. For months, he had treated me like a competitor, waiting for the chance to take something from him. Every time I corrected the record, he heard attack. Every time I refused to sign one of his statements, he heard ambition. He could understand money. He could understand leverage. He could understand someone wanting his clients, his company, his position. What he still could not understand was wanting a boundary more than a prize. You dragged us through 6 months of this, he said. For a few corrections? I didn't drag anyone through anything. Mom shifted beside him. Please don't start with that. I looked at her. Then don't start the story in the middle. Dad tapped my list with one finger. You are going to let a company with 40 employees shrink over wording. No, that is exactly what's happening. No, what's happening is the company is being evaluated without access to my reputation attached to it. His face hardened. That is such an arrogant thing to say. Maybe. Ashley looked at me from the far end of the table. She did not interrupt. Neither did her attorney. I continued. I'm not taking your company away from you, Dad. I'm finding out how much of it was actually yours. Silence. Mom's eyes widened slightly. Dad's face reddened. You think Carter Residential Group exists because of you? I think the expansion you were chasing benefited from making clients believe they could reach me through you. Ridiculous. Then removing me should not matter. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the problem he had been avoiding from the beginning. If my work truly meant as little as he had spent years saying, then my withdrawal should have been irrelevant. If my withdrawal mattered, then he had been lying to himself long before he lied to clients. Dad pushed my list back. We built you. I felt something in me go very still. He had said versions of that sentence all my life. Not always angrily, sometimes proudly. We gave you opportunities. We put a roof over your head. We drove you to programs. We paid for lessons. We gave you everything. All of it was true in the ordinary way parents support children. The mistake was the invoice he believed came due afterward. You raised me, I said. There's a difference. Mom shook her head. You hear yourself? This is what I mean. Everything has to be transactional with you. I almost laughed. Mom, you are the one arguing that raising me created a claim on my company. That is not what I said. You keep saying things, then telling me I'm wrong when I follow them to where they lead. I said family shares. Family asks. Not for every little thing. My professional name is not a little thing. Dad stood. His attorney said his name quietly. Dad ignored him. You have always needed to prove you were separate. I stayed seated. I did for a long time. And now? Now I just am. That landed differently. I saw it. For years, my independence had still been reactive. I had built distance, partly because I wanted my parents to see that I did not need them. Somewhere during those months, that changed. I no longer needed them to notice. Dad sat down again. The rest of the meeting became less emotional because lawyers are very good at turning pain into bullet points. The Whitmore dispute was handled separately from my conditions. Their attorneys had already narrowed the issues. Carter would provide a negotiated fee adjustment connected to the design management portion of the project, contribute towards some of the Whitmore's legal costs, and issue written clarification about what had and had not been included in the original design team. There was no courtroom verdict. No one was arrested. No judge announced that my parents were terrible people. The matter ended the way most expensive business disputes end, when everyone has enough evidence to understand the risk. With numbers, language, signatures, and people agreeing to stop paying lawyers to tell them what they already knew. Morrow's part was even simpler. Carter acknowledged in writing that Morrow Landscape Studio had never maintained a standing partnership or automatic consulting relationship with the company. Future use required written authorization. Known recipients received corrections. Carter covered the direct, legal, and administrative costs Morrow had incurred responding to the unauthorized representations. I did not ask for a public apology. I did not ask Dad to admit he had stolen my career. I did not ask Mom to write a confession explaining why she had cropped my email. The documents already said what mattered. By early May, the Whitmore matter was settled. Henry Blackwell did not return to Carter. Nobody had to persuade him. He had paused the renovation conversation during the dispute, reviewed what happened, and decided to work with someone else. He sent me one short email months later thanking me for answering his question honestly at the beginning. That was all. He did not hand Morrow the project. I did not expect him to. The point was never that the billionaire would rescue me. He had simply been the first person standing close enough to accidentally expose the difference between what my father said about me and what my father sold about me. Another architecture firm that had referred several large projects to Carter became more cautious as well. They did not announce a boycott. They did not post anything online. They simply stopped sending the kind of ultra-luxury leads Dad had spent the previous few years trying to attract. Business relationships often end much more quietly than family ones. Dad canceled the second office he had planned to open. The lease had not been finalized, which kept the loss from becoming catastrophic, but the expansion was over. Carter Residential Group reduced its business development staff and went back to focusing more heavily on the custom residential projects that had made the company successful in the first place. It survived. That mattered to me. Not because I wanted Dad protected from consequence, because the consequence fit. He had not built a fake company. He had built a real one and tried to make it look bigger by borrowing credibility he did not own. Once that borrowed piece disappeared, he was left with the business he had actually built. I could live with that. Ashley resigned in the middle of May. She called me after she gave notice. I did it. You resigned? Yes. How are you? Terrified. That sounds normal. I thought you'd say congratulations. Do you want congratulations? She thought about it. Not yet. Then not yet. Dad had apparently told her she was abandoning him at the worst possible moment. Mom called it another example of me dividing the family. I knew those details because Ashley told me, not because I was there. She did not come to work for Morrow. I would not have offered, and she did not ask. Instead, she took several weeks, then began interviewing for business development roles outside residential construction. For the first time in her adult life, she had to introduce herself without Dad's company behind her name. I think that frightened her more than resigning. We met for coffee in June. It was awkward. Not hostile. Just careful. Ashley apologized again. I did not make her repeat the whole confession. She knew what she had done. I knew what she had done. At some point, making a person recite their mistakes stops being accountability and starts becoming punishment. I don't know how to fix this, she said. You don't. She frowned. That's encouraging. I mean, you don't fix 10 years in one lunch. So what do? We can start with coffee. She smiled. That's all I get? For now. I'll take it. I meant what I had told her months earlier. Believing her apology was not the same as trusting her. But trust did not need to return all at once. It could return in small things. A text answered honestly. A dinner where nobody carried a message from Mom. A question asked directly instead of routed through the family. Coffee was enough. Mom had a harder time accepting the new arrangement. She called me in July. Her voice sounded tired. Your sister won't answer me. I was at home, trimming dead leaves from a potted citrus tree on our patio. For someone Dad still occasionally called a gardener, I found the irony soothing. Then, give her time. I've given her time. Apparently not enough. She's punishing us. That's between you and Ashley. Everything is between people now. Everything has boundaries. Yes, you made her like this. I put down the shears. No, she never treated us this way before. That doesn't mean I caused it. Mom's voice cracked. I'm losing both my daughters. I felt the old pull immediately. Fix it. Reassure her. Call Ashley. Translate everyone's feelings until Mom could return to believing the family was intact. For years, I had refused that role in business, but still slipped into it emotionally more often than I realized. This time, I did not. Then maybe stop asking one daughter to pay for what you did to the other. She went silent. That's cruel. No, what would be cruel is telling Ashley she should trust you before she's ready because you're uncomfortable. You don't care that this family is falling apart? I care. Then do something. I am. What? I'm not pretending it's fine. Mom began to cry. Quietly. Not theatrically. That was harder. I loved my mother. That truth survived everything. Loving someone did not obligate me to remove consequences they had earned. I'm not cutting you off, I said. But I'm not going back to the old version either. What does that even mean? It means if you want a relationship with me, you respect the word no the first time. And Ashley? That is hers to answer. So you won't help. Not like that. She ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat outside for a long time afterward. It did not feel like victory. Some boundaries do not. A few weeks later, Dad contacted me directly for the first time since the settlement. His email was short. He said Carter was rebuilding its referral network and that if I was willing to discuss a legitimate future relationship, he would structure it correctly this time. No assumptions. No family network language. No retroactive statement. An actual business proposal. In some ways, it was the most respectful offer he had ever made me. I declined. He called after receiving my answer. You didn't even ask what the terms were. I read enough. They'd be good. I believe you. Then why not talk? Because I don't want to build my firm inside Carter. You wouldn't be inside Carter. Then we don't need the arrangement. He was quiet. You're still punishing me. No. You could help rebuild this. I know. And you won't? No. Why? I looked around my office. The drawings pinned to the walls. The material samples. Claire laughing at something down the hall. The firm I had built one project, one client, one mistake, and one corrected decision at a time. I already built something of my own. Dad did not answer for several seconds. Then he said, "Fine." This time, I let fine mean fine. By August, 10 months had passed since the wedding. I was invited to speak at a regional landscape architecture conference about private residential design and long-term site planning. Nothing about family, nothing about Carter, nothing about revenge. Ryan came. He sat toward the back because he had arrived late from the hospital and refused to take a seat near the front once the presentation had started. At the beginning, the moderator introduced me, founder and principal of Morrow Landscape Studio. That was all. No reference to my father, no family business, no explanation of who my husband was, no billionaire clients, just the name of the company I had built. After the talk, a young woman studying landscape architecture came up while people were gathering their bags. She could not have been more than 22. She told me her parents kept asking whether landscape architecture was a real career. I almost laughed. Instead, I told her I understood. Then she asked, "Did your family always understand what you wanted to do?" I thought about Dad at my wedding. Mom's champagne glass. The word gardener. The proposal. The folder. Ashley. The cropped email. The comments in the version history. All the months I had spent learning something I should probably have understood sooner. "No," I said. But eventually I learned they didn't have to. She smiled. I watched her leave. For years, I had thought independence meant not caring what my parents thought. I was wrong. Not caring had made me careless. It had made me ignore small boundary violations because correcting them felt beneath me. Real independence was different. It meant knowing what belonged to me and protecting it without needing anyone else to approve the protection. My work was mine. My reputation was mine. My name was mine. My parents had raised me. They had not purchased me. And in the end, I did not have to destroy them to prove it. I only had to stop letting them use what had never been theirs. You can love your family without giving them ownership of your work, your reputation, or the decisions you make as an adult. When someone uses your name, money, time, or credibility without permission, staying silent does not protect the relationship. It teaches them that your boundaries can be ignored. Ask questions, keep records, correct false claims, and never sign something untrue just to make their consequences disappear. You can admit your own mistakes without accepting responsibility for choices you did not make. Most importantly, know when to stop. Protecting yourself is different from destroying someone else. Once the truth is clear and your boundaries are secure, you do not need to keep fighting just to prove you won. If this story reminded you to protect what you have built and choose self-respect over guilt, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more family stories with lessons worth remembering.